Chapter 459. Gu Nianji raised her head and raised her little fist to lightly hit Hua Xiaoheng's shoulder. She whispered, "How can I get used to this kind of thing? It's not like kissing me later is a big deal." Hua Xiaoheng didn't say anything. He only looked down at her quietly. His eyes were as dark and deep as black crystals. When he looked at you intently, you would feel like he had the whole world in his eyes, and he was willing to hold the whole world in front of you without saying a word. Gu Nianji gradually felt like she was under a spell when he looked at her like that. She couldn't stop her heart from softening. There were two voices arguing in her heart. One said, "That's it. He's just this kind of person. Do you really want him to change for you?" The other voice said, "But he loves me, doesn't he? Can't he change a little bit for me that's harmless?" In the end, Gu Nianji still looked down and didn't look at Hua Xiaoheng's eyes. She wrapped her arms around Hua Xiaoheng's neck and shook it. She said coquettishly, "Hua Xiao, try it? It's not like it's a big deal." She hung on Hua Xiaoheng like that and completely forgot that they were in a bath and sitting in a bathtub full of water. Hua Xiaoheng, who hadn't had his fill just now, did it again. After another bath, Gu Nianji wanted to cry as Hua Xiaoheng carried her out of the bathroom to the bedroom. She rolled onto the bed and wrapped herself tightly with a thin blanket. She fell asleep with her back to Hua Xiaoheng. Hua Xiaoheng lay down behind her contentedly and said in a low voice, "If I wanted it, do you think you could stop me with a thin blanket?" As he spoke, he leaned forward and dug Gu Nianji out of the thin blanket. He carried her in his arms and covered her with his own blanket. Gu Nianji originally wanted to resist, but Hua Xiaoheng's embrace was too warm and safe. She only pushed him symbolically and found a comfortable position on his shoulder to lie down. She fell asleep in less than a minute. When she woke up the next day, she found herself in exercise again. "Hua Xiao, are you done? I still have to go to school." Gu Nianji whimpered under him. She was driving him crazy. Although her voice was pleasant to hear, her constant urging affected his mood. In the end, Hua Xiaoheng impatiently covered her mouth with his lips. As long as she opened her mouth to speak, he would go deep into her mouth and suck the tip of her tongue out. He sucked it tightly until she couldn't speak anymore. Apart from moaning and sobbing, she could not say anything else. After another round of intimacy, Gu Nianji once again lay paralyzed on the bed as she watched Hua Xiaoheng get up and get dressed. Even though Hua Xiaoheng was the one who had exerted himself last night, he was also the one who felt refreshed and energetic when he woke up this morning. It was as if he hadn't done anything the night before and had slept for 16 hours. Gu Nianji finally snorted loudly in dissatisfaction, indicating that there was still a person who was about to be exhausted by him waiting for him to comfort her. Hua Xiaoheng turned to look at her with a smile on his lips. He walked over, bent over and reached out to pat her cheek. "Stop fooling around and get up. I'll take you back to school." As he spoke, Hua Xiaoheng took out Gu Nianji's phone and tossed it to her. "Your professor, he must be really anxious. How many times has he called you?" Gu Nianji sat up immediately. Gripping the phone, her eyes widened as she looked at Hua Xiaoheng. "Hua Xiao, why is my phone with you?" She clearly remembered that it was in her pocket. "I saw that you were sleeping soundly last night and was worried that the phone would wake you up, so I took out your phone and turned it off." Hua Xiaoheng said calmly as he walked to the closet and took out a set of clothes for Gu Nianji. "Go shower and change. I'll make breakfast for you." Gu Nianji remained seated and glared at Hua Xiaoheng. She mustered up her courage and said, "Hua Xiao, you can't treat my phone like this." Hua Xiaoheng didn't respond to her. He put his hands in his pockets and leaned against the closet. He looked at her calmly. "Why aren't you getting up and showering? You don't want to shower alone? Then let's shower together. It'll save water." As he spoke, he pretended to unbutton the top of his military uniform. Gu Nianji howled and hugged her clothes as she got up from the bed. She put on her pajamas and rushed to the bathroom. Then she locked the bathroom door. She didn't want to be eaten again. At 7 o'clock sharp, Hua Xiaoheng drove Gu Nianji back to her dorm. He rested his hands on the steering wheel and gave her a sidelong glance. "Go up. I'll pick you up this weekend." Gu Nianji's resentment was instantly soothed by the words, "pick you up." She looked at Hua Xiaoheng's handsome profile and secretly despised herself for being spineless and unprincipled. However, her body seemed to have a mind of its own and she leaned over to kiss Hua Xiaoheng's cheek. She blushed. "Hua Xiao, do you remember what I told you?" "Yes, I do." Hua Xiaoheng's tone was a bit perfunctory. It was like he was speaking in a bureaucratic manner. Gu Nianji happened to know that whenever Hua Xiaoheng said this, it meant, accept criticism and never repent. She got out of the car and stood on the steps in front of the dorm building. She watched Hua Xiaoheng's car drive away. For the first time she felt uncertain about her future. She didn't ask for much, so why wouldn't Hua Xiaoheng compromise? How many times had she compromised? She had no self-respect or principles in front of him. Even she looked down on herself. When she returned to the dorm, Ma Qiqi still hadn't gotten out of bed. Gu Nianji went to her room to pack her bag and then went to the cafeteria to buy breakfast for Ma Qiqi. She also bought herself a bowl of yellow corn stubble coarse grain porridge. Although she had already eaten Hua Xiaoheng's breakfast, eating Yangzhou fried rice so early in the morning made her mouth dry. She felt like she needed to rehydrate. When Ma Qiqi opened the door and came out, she was surprised to see 2 deep-fried dough sticks, a bowl of tofu pudding, and 3 soup dumplings on the dining table in the living room. Gu Nianji was sitting alone at the dining table with a bowl of yellow porridge in front of her. She was enjoying it. Ma Qiqi cheered and rushed over to hug Gu Nianji from behind. She kissed her on the cheek and said, "Nianji, you're really my Miss Tian Luo. Keep it up in the future." She then sat across from Gu Nianji and began to gorge herself on breakfast. Gu Nianji pushed all her worries aside and smiled as she watched Ma Qiqi eat. She felt especially accomplished. Ma Qiqi ate deep-fried dough sticks and asked Gu Nianji, "Where did you go last night? I almost left the door open for you." She then said, "Oh right, Miao Yunxiao was released yesterday. She said she's on bail pending trial. She even came to see you to thank you." "Miao Yunxiao? She came to thank me? Did you hear that right?" Gu Nianji couldn't help looking out the window. The sun still rises from the east. She was very sure the sun didn't rise from the west. "Of course not, I even asked her. She said she'd tell you personally when you got back. Also." Ma Qiqi hesitated before moving closer to Gu Nianji and whispering, "I think she's going to transfer schools." Gu Nianji nodded in understanding. If she doesn't transfer, the school will expel her. So after weighing the pros and cons, it's probably better to voluntarily drop out and transfer schools. They had just finished breakfast when Miao Yunxiao knocked on the door again as expected. Ma Qiqi opened the door and turned to look at Gu Nianji. "Nianji, Miao Yunxiao is looking for you." Gu Nianji came out of the small kitchen and looked at Miao Yunxiao. Miao Yunxiao had probably been scared out of her wits these past few days. Her originally plump face was completely shriveled. Her complexion was sallow and her hair was dry. Her eyes were no longer as lively as before. She avoided eye contact and didn't dare look people in the eye. 10 days in detention didn't look like a good time. Gu Nianji sighed and didn't say anything. She walked to stand next to Ma Qiqi. Miao Yunxiao finally looked up and quickly glanced at Gu Nianji. Her eyes lingered on her fair and supple skin for a few seconds before quickly looking away. She stammered, "Classmate? Classmate Gu, I'm here to thank you." "You flatter me. I don't remember doing anything for you to thank me for." Gu Nianji smiled as she cut off Miao Yunxiao's words. Actually, she wanted Miao Yunxiao to apologize for her baseless words. Unfortunately, Miao Yunxiao was also someone who would rather thank than apologize. Miao Yunxiao hung her head and murmured, "I heard from the people there that you helped find evidence to prove what I said. That's why I was released on bail." Gu Nianji froze and immediately understood that it was probably Yin Shixiang or Zhao Liang's handiwork. Only they knew her role in it. But she didn't understand why they would tell Miao Yunxiao. "Classmate Miao, this is just a coincidence. Don't take it to heart." Gu Nianji said tactfully, "Cooperate well with your lawyer and help the military find Yamaguchi Aiko. You'll be able to contribute and probably get a lighter sentence." "Really?" Miao Yunxiao's head jerked up. "If I find that woman, will I not have a criminal record?" This was the first watch. Asking for recommendation votes. "Oh, and I heard that there would be double monthly votes tomorrow, the 29th. You can save your monthly votes for tomorrow. 7 p.m. the second watch." Chapter 460. Gu Nianji wasn't a judge and didn't know how the court would sentence her, so she couldn't give Miao Yunxiao a definite answer. She could only say tactfully, "You can bring it up with your lawyer. If she has a way, she'll apply to the court." Gu Nianji knew that if Miao Yunxiao really made a great contribution, the court could turn her into a tainted witness. With some further maneuvering, it wouldn't be impossible for her to not have a criminal record. Miao Yunxiao nodded and was now completely obedient to Gu Nianji. Okay, I'll go find my lawyer right away. Classmate Gu, thank you." She bowed to Gu Nianji again to express her gratitude, then quickly ran out. Gu Nianji and Ma Qiqi looked at each other and shook their heads. They didn't mention Miao Yunxiao again. Gu Nianji packed her bag and said to Ma Qiqi, "It's almost 8, I have to go to Professor He's to hand in my homework. Do you have classes today?" Yes, public electives and 2 professional classes. Machichi stretched. I have to go too. After saying goodbye to Machichi, Gunyenji hurried downstairs to the professor's building where Hijichu lived. She didn't dare call and braced herself to press the doorbell when she arrived at Hijichu's suite. Almost at the same time the doorbell rang, the door to Hijichu's suite opened. Hijichu stood expressionlessly at the door. His eyes were dark gray and his face was pale. It was obvious he hadn't slept all night. Gunyenji lowered her head guiltily and whispered, "Professor He, I'm here to deliver your homework." Hijichu's hand tightened on the doorknob, his thin lips moving, but he didn't say anything. He stepped to the side and opened the door to wait for Gunyenji to come in. Gunyenji moved in and immediately took out her laptop from her bag. "Professor He, I sent you everything you needed for today's electives and my thesis this morning." Hijichu grunted and turned to walk to the kitchen. "I haven't had breakfast yet." "Have a seat." Her voice, which used to be clear and cool, now had a thick nasal sound as if she had caught a cold. Gunyenji felt very guilty and put down her bag to follow him to the kitchen. She asked with concern, "Professor He, do you have a cold?" Hijichu didn't say anything. He took out a bag of coffee and turned on the coffee machine to make coffee. Gunyenji paced around him. "Professor He, is it really okay to have coffee so early in the morning? You're not feeling well, so you'd better drink some milk? Or do you want to cook porridge?" Hijichu looked at her coldly. "You know how to do it?" "I won't." Gunyenji shook her head honestly. "But I can try making ginger tea. You can drink a cup of hot ginger tea. It can keep you cold." Hijichu's expression was indifferent as he pointed at the induction cooker next to him. "Go do it." "Oh." Gunyenji walked over and opened Hijichu's cupboard to take a look. She found the ginger candy and turned on her phone to search for information on how to make ginger tea. Hijichu's coffee was ready. He saw Gunyenji holding her phone in one hand and standing in front of the induction cooker. She looked at her phone as she added water and ginger sugar to the small soup pot. It was obvious that he was sharpening his spear just before the battle. Hijichu's mood, which had been pent up the entire night, finally improved. He carried his coffee to stand beside Gunyenji and said casually, "Nyenji, do you think I'll be lucky enough to drink your ginger tea before sunset today?" Gunyenji didn't turn around. "It doesn't have to take that long. It'll be ready in 10 minutes. She realized Hijichu was teasing her after she said that. She couldn't help but turn around and glare at him with a pout. Her large eyes were bright and watery. When she looked at him from the corner of her eye, she actually looked flirtatious. Hijichu quickly looked down and took a big gulp of coffee before leaving the kitchen. 10 minutes later, Gunyenji's ginger tea was finally ready. She poured it into the coffee cup and held it out. Just from the color, it really did look like coffee. Hijichu didn't resist and drank it in one gulp. He had to admit that Gunyenji's learning ability was very strong. Of course, maybe it was because ginger tea had all the ingredients and was easy to learn. In short, her first cup of ginger tea was very successful. Not long after Hijichu drank it, he felt a faint sweat on his back. His throbbing headache also improved. He wasn't used to wearing sweaty clothes, so he planned to take a shower. He reminded Gunyenji, "I sent you a few cases yesterday. Take a good look at them and prepare a transcript of the key points of the trial debate. I'll go wash up." Gunyenji agreed and carried her laptop to the small study next to the living room to sit down. Ever since she became Hijichu's teaching assistant, he slowly transformed the small study into a room that suited Gunyenji. The desk was replaced with a beige color, and there was an additional cubicle bookshelf that was half the height of a person against the wall. It was sparsely filled with professional books. On the other side of the room was a soft sofa that could be used as a bed. There were several pillows and blankets on it. Sometimes in the afternoon, when she worked late at Hijichu's place, she would take an afternoon nap on the small sofa bed so she didn't have to run around. Of course, when she took an afternoon nap, she would lock the door from the inside, regardless of whether Hijichu was in the room or not. Hijichu walked into his bedroom and went to the bathroom to turn on the water for a bath. Before he could take off his clothes, he heard his phone ring. This time the ringtone was a bit strange. It was different from the Wuxia Empire's ringtone frequency. Hijichu's heart skipped a beat. He unlocked the phone and put it to his ear. "Jichu, when are you coming back?" An old, powerful voice came from the phone. The tone was firm, like someone who had been in a high position for a long time and naturally obeyed orders. Hijichu didn't care at all. "I'll go back when I'm done." He paused before asking, "Father, how are you? I'll never get better if you don't come back." A few coughs came from the other side of the phone, followed by a crisp female voice whispering to Hijichu's father. Hijichu could tell it was Auntie Chin's voice. He tightened his grip on the phone. Jichu, I heard you found Yanji. Why didn't you bring her back? Mister, he asked again. With your abilities, is it that difficult? Jichu pursed his lips and didn't answer the question directly. He changed the subject. Father, I heard you and Auntie Chin are planning to have another child. Do you need to find a good hospital to help? This successfully diverted Mr. He's attention. Or rather, it diverted Auntie Chin's attention. Auntie Chin took the phone from Mr. He and said to Jichu, Chu, you're making fun of your Auntie Chin. You know your father only has one son, and you're the only son he wants, yet you're still mad at him. Chu, come back quickly. Put that matter aside for now. Auntie Chin will think of a way. Although Auntie Chin was Mr. He's second wife after he passed away, Jichu never called her mother or Mrs. He. He only called her Auntie Chin like before. Jichu shook his head. I know. I'll hang up now. It won't be good if the people here notice. Auntie Chin immediately hung up, afraid to leave a trace. Jichu looked at his phone and smiled. If he hadn't intercepted the Trojan virus of the Wuxia Imperial Special Forces, the call would have been intercepted by them. Putting away his phone, Jichu went to the bathroom to take a bath. What he didn't know was that although he had modified Zhao Liang's Trojan virus, his phone needed the Nandu satellite system to receive cell phone signals. Zhao Liang's Trojan virus relied on the Nandu satellite system to leave a backdoor. The call from his hometown still left some clues in the Special Forces interception system. Zhao Liangza was staring at the strange frequency coming from Jichu's phone in a daze. It was obviously captured by his Trojan virus, but he couldn't crack it no matter how hard he tried. He didn't believe that there was a password in this world that he or Gun Yanji couldn't crack. Yes, he decided. If he couldn't crack it, he would go to Gun Yanji. For the past few days, Prime Minister Do had been under pressure from the Senate and the military. Prime Minister, the deadline for the Senate is approaching. Are you ready to be questioned by the Senate? Prime Minister Do's senior assistant asked worriedly. The principal of B University has already been suspended. Once the new acting principal takes office, many things will be exposed. Prime Minister Do braced himself and said, What do I have to hide? Even if Ian met Miao Yunxiao, that doesn't mean she was talking to her about the Japanese woman. But the Prime Minister's office called the principal's office to delete the video. How do you explain that? The assistant asked anxiously. He was the one who made the call, obviously under Prime Minister Do's orders. The military and Senate had somehow found the audio of the call and were seeking permission from the court to use it as evidence in court. Don't worry, I'll think of something. Prime Minister Do was about to speak when he saw a familiar hunched figure pushing a cleaning cart in. He quickly said to his assistant, Go prepare your speech. I'll make a few calls. His senior assistant bowed and left, gently closing the door. Prime Minister Do looked at the cleaning lady and breathed heavily. Miss Yamaguchi, why are you here again? This was the second watch. Requesting recommendation votes. Oh, remember to vote tomorrow. Chapter 461. Yamaguchi Aiko, who was wearing a headscarf and pretending to be a cleaner, looked up and smiled bitterly at Prime Minister Do. I have nowhere to go. If I don't come to find you, am I supposed to wait for death? The Wuxia Empire's Secret Service had set up an inescapable net in the imperial capital to track Yamaguchi Aiko. Although it wasn't as efficient as the Special Operations Forces, it was enough to force her to seek out Prime Minister Do. Prime Minister Do was speechless. She had clearly said that in order not to drag him down, Yamaguchi Aiko would not contact him again, and that she would frame Deputy Chief of Staff Su's family. Fellow Taoist can die, why should I die? Prime Minister Do's face darkened. He pointed to the bookshelf by the wall. Clean that side first. Since Yamaguchi Aiko was pretending to be a cleaner, she naturally had to clean up to deceive others. Prime Minister Do, I found a way out, but I need your cooperation before I can leave. Yamaguchi Aiko picked up the cleaning tools and started cleaning the shelves by the wall. Prime Minister Do was flipping through a book on the bookshelf by the wall. When he spoke to her, he didn't look at Yamaguchi Aiko. Instead, he stared at the book in front of him. If anyone else saw them, they wouldn't be able to tell that he was communicating with Yamaguchi Aiko. How do we cooperate? I'm also keeping a close watch on this side. Prime Minister Do whispered, I've already informed you twice about the Secret Service's operation. Why haven't you left yet? The Secret Service was part of the Wuxia Imperial Cabinet and was the equivalent of the Special Operations Forces in the Wuxia Empire. In theory, it was Prime Minister Do's subordinate. One was in charge of domestic affairs, while the other was in charge of foreign affairs. Their responsibilities overlapped, but the scope of their jurisdiction was different. However, because the Secret Service was directly under the cabinet, its level of confidentiality was not high enough. There were too many people who could intervene, and their strength was not as strong as the Special Operations Forces, so they had yet to capture Yamaguchi Aiko. Yamaguchi Aiko's face showed a trace of vicious resentment. There are people from the Special Operations Forces working with the Secret Service at the customs. Therefore, she did not dare to test him. She wouldn't be able to escape if she was seen by the people from the Special Operations Forces. And she absolutely could not be caught, because the consequences would be too severe if she were to be caught. Yamaguchi Aiko couldn't help but shiver. She didn't dare to think about the consequences of being caught. At that time he could only commit suicide immediately. There would be no second option. What? There are people from the Special Ops at Customs. Prime Minister Do was shocked and angry. He threw the book in his hand. How dare they? Customs is directly under the cabinet. Is the Special Operations Forces crazy? Yamaguchi Aiko nodded. Prime Minister Do, please think of something. You are the Prime Minister. How can you let an organization under the military hold you back? Think about it. You're clearly on par with Senior Speaker Long and General G, but now you've been made inferior by the Special Operations Forces. What's the point of being Prime Minister? Prime Minister Do's expression darkened. He had long sensed that as the Prime Minister of a nation, he was supposed to be the leader of the nation. At the very least, he was supposed to be one of the three chariots that advanced side by side with Speaker Long and General G. However, he was always looked down upon by those two people. They were happy to meddle in his affairs and he wanted to test the power of the military branch in the Senate, but they refused no matter what. It was so unfair. I'll think of something. What they're doing is indeed against the rules. Prime Minister Do planned to have his senior assistants look through the relevant laws of the Wuxia Empire to find out where the Special Operations Forces had violated the law and order them to completely withdraw from domestic affairs. He believed that Senior Speaker Long and the Military Supreme Council would also agree on this point. No one wanted to see such an organization appear. You can think of something later, but the most important thing right now is for me to get out. Yamaguchi Aiko smiled meaningfully. Prime Minister Do, could you help me? How can I help you? Prime Minister Do looked at Yamaguchi Aiko suspiciously. Have you forgotten our agreement? They've already targeted my people. If something happens to me, you won't be able to get away with it either. Of course I won't let anything happen to you. You're my biggest backer in the Wuxia Empire. If something happens to you, what good will it do to me? Everything before will be for naught. Even if I'm willing, the Yamaguchi Gumi behind me won't. I'd rather die than try their punishment. So don't worry. Yamaguchi Aiko earnestly comforted Prime Minister Do, trying to dispel his doubts. Prime Minister Do breathed a sigh of relief when he heard Yamaguchi Aiko's words. That's right, the Japanese Yamaguchi Gumi punished their own people even more harshly and cruelly than outsiders. Alright then, remember what you said. Prime Minister Do's eyelids drooped as he took another book from the bookshelf. Yamaguchi Aiko picked up a cleaning tool and moved closer to Prime Minister Do as she cleaned the bookshelf. She lowered her voice so that even if there was a bug in the room, it might not be able to hear her. Prime Minister Do, you have to think of a way. Yamaguchi Aiko squinted her slanted phoenix eyes, her expression gentle. If something happens to me, the Yamaguchi Gumi will come after you. Prime Minister Do understood and frowned. I'll think of a way, but the most important thing right now is to resolve the situation on my side. What situation? Yamaguchi Aiko's eyes narrowed. Tell me about it. I have a senior assistant who called the principal of B University about my daughter and you. They found out. Prime Minister Do turned to look at Yamaguchi Aiko. Do you have a solution? That's simple. Anyone who's found out just has to disappear. Yamaguchi Aiko said without hesitation. Leave that to me. Disappear? Oh. Prime Minister Do didn't understand. The people in the Secret Service are like dogs. Their noses are sharp. Do you think they won't be able to find you if you hide him? Prime Minister Do, you're so funny. Why would I hide him? Yamaguchi Aiko giggled. When I say disappear, of course I mean disappear. Really? Prime Minister Do folded his hands behind his back and paced around the study a few times. Then, what about your support? Yamaguchi Aiko didn't expect Prime Minister Do to still be thinking about the election at this point. She blinked and quickly replied, no problem. The Yamaguchi Gumi will send someone else to contact you. It's not convenient for me to appear again. Also, if I screw up this time, I'll have to face punishment when I get back. I probably won't appear in the Wuxia Empire again. That's good. Prime Minister Do nodded. I'll wait for your news. Help me solve this problem and I'll help you get out. It's a deal. Yamaguchi Aiko let out a long sigh of relief. She had finally hoodwinked Prime Minister Do. After discussing the plan, Yamaguchi Aiko calmly left Prime Minister Do's official residence. Not long after she left, Yamaguchi Aiko discovered that she was being followed. She smiled. She wanted them to notice her at Prime Minister Do's official residence. Otherwise, she wouldn't be able to divert their attention. Wearing a simple cleaning lady's uniform, she squeezed onto a crowded bus. Changing seats on the bus, she quickly lost her pursuers and disappeared into the sea of people. At dawn the next day, there was a robbery and murder on a street not far from Prime Minister Do's official residence. The victim happened to be one of Prime Minister Do's senior assistants. He was the senior assistant responsible for contacting the Prime Minister's office with all the major universities. He had been working overnight at the Prime Minister's official residence. He had just finished all his work and left the Prime Minister's official residence to return to his apartment. Unfortunately, he met with a mishap. What happened? Who is in charge of public security? How could such a vicious robbery and murder happen so close to the Prime Minister's official residence? And the victim was our senior assistant. What if it was an ordinary citizen? Wouldn't they have no way out? The officials in the Prime Minister's official residence were filled with righteous indignation. They questioned the Imperial Capital Police Headquarters. The Imperial Capital Police Headquarters quickly dispatched their most elite officers to the scene to investigate the case. However, they discovered that the surveillance system in the nearby street had been sabotaged by someone just minutes before the robbery and murder took place. Without the surveillance, the robbery couldn't be reconstructed. They could only rely on the officers' deductions. When they investigated the scene, they saw the victim lying in a pool of blood. His throat had been slit with a sharp blade. The briefcase in his hand had fallen nearby, but his wallet, phone, and watch were all still there. If it was a robbery and murder, what was it? No money or documents were lost. Even the Rolex, which was like a hard currency, was still there. Is this a robbery and murder? This is obviously a murder. A police officer muttered, shaking his head in disdain. Be careful with what you say. As a police officer, you can't just say things without evidence. His boss warned him in a low voice. You need evidence to speak. Hurry up and see if there's any evidence of a murder. This was the first night watch. The double monthly votes had begun. Everyone, you can vote now. And recommendation votes. It was 7 o'clock in the evening. Chapter 462. Prime Minister Do was about to go to the Senate for questioning with the Prime Minister. He was to explain that he had called the principal's office of B University to request the removal of the surveillance footage. He hadn't expected to be robbed the day before he was to be questioned. The people at the Imperial Police Headquarters were also furious. They couldn't even find the surveillance footage on the streets, much less B University. If there were no surveillance footage, they would mobilize the public to find witnesses. But witnesses weren't easy to find. It required time, effort, and manpower. Prime Minister Do was furious. He personally called Speaker Long and General Ji and scolded them. Do you want me dead before you stop? First it was my assistant, and now it's going to be me next. Of course he had reason to be angry when his man was killed for no reason. Prime Minister Do also personally went to the assistant's home to offer his condolences and a large sum of money to comfort his parents. He also promised to let the assistant's younger brother work at the Prime Minister's official residence to make up for his lack of salary. The senior assistant's family immediately felt that Prime Minister Do was a good person and didn't plan to pursue the matter further. They only hoped that the murderer would be found soon to comfort their son's soul in heaven. Because of the senior assistant's death, the Senate and the army's questioning was temporarily halted. If it continued and Prime Minister Do mobilized his voters, the Senate and the army wouldn't be able to handle it. After this incident, Prime Minister Do trusted Yamaguchi Aiko even more. A week later, Yamaguchi Aiko appeared at Prime Minister Do's official residence again. This time she didn't appear as a cleaner. Instead, she appeared as the personal assistant of the Prime Minister's wife. She wore a pair of large black-rimmed glasses and a double eyelid sticker over her almond-shaped eyes. Her eyes looked very different from before. If one wasn't specially trained, it would be difficult to recognize her as Yamaguchi Aiko, who had once disguised herself as a cleaner. You're not bad. Are you willing to be my personal assistant? The Prime Minister's wife spoke amiably to Yamaguchi Aiko, treating it like an interview. I'm going to Southeast Asia with the Prime Minister to attend the ASEAN multilateral meeting in a week. I need a personal assistant to go along and help me with my personal image. Can you do that? Yamaguchi Aiko signed to her politely. Don't worry, madam. I have several years of experience in the United States, helping Hollywood stars design their personal images. Madam, you are so graceful and elegant, much better than those celebrities. I will design your personal image well and make you the most beautiful First Lady of the Wuxia Empire. Although the First Lady didn't know why Prime Minister Do had urged her to take on this ugly mute woman as her personal assistant, she was convinced by the sign language interpreter. She felt that even if she were to look for personal assistants all over the country, she might not be able to find one as suitable as this one. She asked the woman to design a few outfits for her at the last minute, including attending state banquets, casual conversations, and attending opening and closing ceremonies. With the jewelry, hair, and makeup that she had carefully selected, she looked like a completely different person. Your hands are so nimble. Did you study tailoring before? The First Lady looked at her reflection in the mirror happily. She was very satisfied. Yamaguchi Aiko choked for a moment and looked a little unhappy, but she quickly recovered and continued to gesture with her hands with a smile. To do image design, you need to learn a little about clothing tailoring, as well as beauty and hairdressing, jewelry design and identification. Okay, move here immediately. We only have a week before we go abroad. The First Lady immediately decided to hire this person as her personal assistant for overseas visits. According to the law, the Wuxia Empire's First Lady's personal assistant positions were paid by the state. The First Lady had full authority to hire the First Lady. Of course, she had to pass a routine background check, but it was also done by the Prime Minister's own security department. Because the position of the First Lady's personal assistant had always been a friend or relative of the First Lady, the background check was not as strict as the Prime Minister's staff, who wanted to check 3 generations of ancestors and collateral relatives. However, what Prime Minister Do and his wife didn't know was that because the Prime Minister's family was already being watched, the First Lady's personal assistant was also under surveillance. After Yamaguchi Aiko finished her recruitment, she came out of the Prime Minister's residence. As usual, she revealed many flaws that attracted the attention of the Secret Service. But just like the last time after she got on the subway, these people lost track of her. The Secret Service realized that they had lost their target again, but they didn't panic. After sending the news back, the background check personnel they had planted in Prime Minister Do's official residence also reported back about the First Lady's new personal assistant. After comparing the two, they found an important clue. This personal assistant's background information is all fake. Tisk, it's rare to see such careless fake information. The Secret Service personnel checked Yamaguchi Aiko's new identity and found out that she was the cleaning lady they had lost last time. Yamaguchi Aiko, who was good at disguising herself. It really was Prime Minister Do who worked with the Japanese Yamaguchi Gumi. The Secret Service personnel was shocked and angry. How could he do this? For the sake of the election, he would sell his soul to the devil. What misunderstanding do you have about these people who value power over their lives? Then what should we do? He's our top boss. Are we going to go against him? Isn't that skipping ranks? How can he still be our boss after doing this? Bah. The Secret Service personnel were not to be trifled with. They quickly analyzed Prime Minister Do's affairs and finally locked onto the Foreign Affairs delegation for the ASEAN Multilateral Conference in Southeast Asia in a week's time. They concluded that if Yamaguchi Aiko wanted to use Prime Minister Do's power to escape, she must have used her position as the First Lady's personal assistant to travel with the Foreign Affairs delegation that was about to leave the country. A week later, the Foreign Affairs delegation for the ASEAN Multilateral Conference, led by Prime Minister Do, set off for the special Foreign Affairs passage at the Imperial Capital Airport. This passage allowed them to avoid the stringent airport security checks, as well as the eyes and ears of the Special Operations Forces and Secret Service. The Foreign Affairs delegation had special privileges. They didn't have to go through airport security because they had their own personnel to do the security checks. They also boarded a special Foreign Affairs plane, not a civilian plane. However, when they arrived at the end of the special Foreign Affairs passage, they saw the Secret Service's security personnel waiting in formation. They wore the black uniform of the Secret Service and gold shield armbands. Their hands were crossed behind their backs and they stood at the end of the passage like tall trees, silently watching Prime Minister Do's Foreign Affairs delegation. Prime Minister Do's heart skipped a beat when he saw this. His eyes subconsciously swept over his wife's personal assistant. What are you doing? We are a foreign affairs delegation. We don't have to go through domestic airport security checks, Prime Minister Do's subordinate said fiercely, waving his arms to let them through. A director of the Secret Service walked over and saluted Prime Minister Do. Prime Minister Do, your visit is a matter of national importance. We are worried that someone will mix in with your delegation and harm you and your wife. Please move to the VIP lounge over there. We will let you through after we've searched all the members of the delegation and ensured your safety. My delegation has no problem. Prime Minister Do objected without hesitation. I'm in a hurry. Please move aside. Prime Minister Do had spoken. The Secret Service didn't dare object, but they still refused to let them through. The two groups of people confronted each other at the exit of the Special Foreign Affairs passage. Everyone looked at each other, unsure of what to do. Prime Minister Do was getting more and more anxious. When he saw the Secret Service personnel on the other side of the passage, he became even more anxious. He gave his subordinate a look and said anxiously, "Don't worry about us. Let's go. The private plane is waiting." Yes, Prime Minister. Since Prime Minister Do had spoken, the subordinates were no longer afraid. Everyone rushed forward and quickly pushed the Secret Service personnel away. This time, Prime Minister Do's delegation was especially large. There were more than 500 people. There were only about 20 Secret Service personnel guarding here, but each of them could fight 10 people at a time. The literati in Prime Minister Do's delegation were no match for them. No one knew who was the first to push or who was the first to slap. In short, the two sides pushed and pulled, and soon the scene went out of control, developing into a group fight. Prime Minister Do and his wife were surrounded by about 10 bodyguards. Yamaguchi Aiko kept her head down and hid behind Mrs. Do. Just as everyone in the VIP lounge was alerted by the commotion, a gunshot from the silencer hit the personal assistant behind Mrs. Do. The person was shot in the middle of her back. Without a word, she threw herself onto Mrs. Do's back. "What are you doing?" Mrs. Do turned around in annoyance, only to find her newly hired personal assistant staring at her with a pair of dead fish eyes. She instinctively pushed her away, but found that her hands were sticky. Looking down, she saw that her hands were covered in blood. The personal assistant she pushed away had already fallen to the ground. "Murder! Murder! Someone killed someone!" Mrs. Do screamed hysterically and fainted. The two groups of people who were fighting each other heard this voice and stopped at the same time. Seeing that Yamaguchi Aiko was dead, Prime Minister Do let out a sigh of relief. However, he didn't show it. Instead, he hugged his wife and cried, "Ambulance! Ambulance! My wife has a heart condition. She can't be frightened." The orderly airport suddenly became a mess. All the security personnel, the Secret Service, and the special forces in plain clothes were sent to the special passageway for foreign affairs to investigate the murder. Meanwhile, in one of the VIP lounges, Gu Yenran stood up slowly, followed by a middle-aged woman in her 40s. They walked to the boarding gate. The investigation was much more relaxed now. Gu Yenran brought the middle-aged woman, who looked like a housekeeper, to her private plane. 5 minutes later, her plane took off in the direction of South America. The middle-aged woman sitting in front of her took off her wig and glasses and smiled at Gu Yenran. "Miss Gu, thank you for your help this time." It was Yamaguchi Aiko who had escaped. "You're so smart to find a mute substitute to be Mrs. Do's personal assistant." Gu Yenran complimented her. "They probably didn't know that you decided early on that Prime Minister Do would be your shield." This was the 3,200-word second update. The double monthly votes had begun. Dear friends, you can cast your monthly votes now. And recommendation votes. Oh, and moi. Chapter 463. Yamaguchi Aiko held a cup of hot drink in a reserved manner and drank it leisurely. Looking out the window at the white clouds and blue sky, she said leisurely, "Would you believe me if I said it was all a coincidence?" "Yes, of course I would. I'll believe anything you say." Gu Yenran cocked her head and smiled, placing a thin blanket on her lap. "I'm just curious. Since you're so familiar with Prime Minister Do, why didn't you use his power to develop your own business in the Wuxia Empire?" "Yenran, you're a natural businesswoman." Yamaguchi Aiko put down her coffee cup and turned to glance at Gu Yenran. Seeing the curiosity on her face, she smiled. "But not everything can be measured by money." "Of course I know that, but what you did was too." Gu Yenran's eyes darted around, seeming to disagree. Yamaguchi Aiko stopped smiling and looked down in thought. Choosing her words carefully, she said, "Yenran, we've known each other for a few years. You know what kind of person I am. If I told you I had no choice, would you believe me? Yes, of course I would. Gu Yenran winked at Yamaguchi Aiko playfully. I'll believe anything you say. After all, I know how capable you are. That's good. Yamaguchi Aiko sighed. All right, thank you for your help this time. When we get back, I'll tell our people that we won't mistreat you. It's nothing. Don't mention it. Gu Yenran shook her head disapprovingly. You don't have to thank me. Just be careful in the future and don't do something like this again. If you're found out, not only will you be finished, but I'll also be implicated. Then she sighed. I don't have a strong backer like you. If something happens, no one will help me. I know. Wasn't it an emergency this time? It won't happen again. Yamaguchi Aiko quickly promised. That's good. Gu Yenran closed her eyes and planned to sleep for a while. Yamaguchi Aiko saw Gu Yenran like this and knew she didn't actually care as much as she said. After all, she had lied to her and hid her identity. Yenran, I really have my reasons. Yamaguchi Aiko was anxious to explain. She didn't want to offend Gu Yenran. There's no need to say anything else. I already said that I believe you. Gu Yenran opened her bright eyes and gently pressed Yamaguchi Aiko's hand. Do I still need to explain our friendship over the past few years? They got to know each other at work. Later, because they had the same temperament, they gradually became closer. The relationship between a client and a manager had developed into a personal best friend relationship. Yamaguchi Aiko was a little excited. No one had ever trusted her so unconditionally. In her life, no matter how hard she worked before the age of 18, she would always be looked down upon. After the age of 18, her life changed drastically due to an accidental opportunity. She was 25 years old this year. Only 7 years had passed since those earth-shaking days. She did not want to lose this kind of life, nor did she want to lose the envious and respectful gazes in the eyes of others. For fame, for profit, for men, she couldn't leave a single one behind. She wanted to keep every single one of them. The roar of the plane got louder and louder, and gradually they couldn't hear clearly. Also, Gu Yenran was in a hurry to take her beauty nap, so they didn't talk for long before they fell asleep. In the airport of the Wuxia Empire's capital, a woman with black-rimmed glasses and straight hair lay on the ground. Streams of blood flowed from her body. Groups of police and military personnel quickly arrived at the airport to cordon off the scene. Prime Minister Do and his wife were taken to the VIP lounge for special protection. You can't obstruct our foreign affairs delegation. If this ASEAN multilateral talks are delayed, can you bear the responsibility? Prime Minister Do was now full of confidence. He felt that his weakness was finally gone, so he yelled at the police. Prime Minister Do, we found out that the woman who was beaten to death outside was Yamaguchi Aiko, whom we've been investigating all this time. We would like to ask you, Prime Minister Do, why was she on your foreign affairs delegation and even your wife's personal assistant? A plain-clothed police officer asked calmly. Prime Minister Do laughed coldly. You've gone too far. Are you trying to bully a dead person? What right do you have to say that she's Yamaguchi Aiko? Do you have evidence? Of course. The plainclothes policeman took out a special arrest warrant and a list of evidence jointly signed by the court and parliament. We have already submitted this to the court. If Mr. Prime Minister has any objections, please explain it to the court. Mr. and Mrs. Prime Minister, please come with us. Prime Minister Do's face paled when he saw the list of evidence. He didn't expect that Yamaguchi Aiko had exposed so many flaws, and that the Secret Service had discovered them one by one. The First Lady's heart skipped a beat and her expression changed. She didn't expect that woman to be Yamaguchi Aiko. And this woman was specially hired by the Prime Minister to be her personal assistant, so she was tricked by the Prime Minister? But it was too late now. Prime Minister Do was still struggling. You want to arrest me? Aren't they afraid that no one will attend the ASEAN multilateral talks? Bringing shame to the country? Prime Minister Do, the Senate has authorized Minister Bai to attend the ASEAN multilateral talks on your behalf. Their new delegation should have taken off by now, so you don't have to worry about the ASEAN multilateral talks anymore. This way, please. Another plainclothes officer from the army walked in to take Prime Minister Do and his group away. What? Minister Bai? Bai Jianqing. Prime Minister Do almost fainted. He had been on guard, but he didn't expect that his Minister of Internal Affairs, Bai Jianqing, would still be able to take advantage of him. Yes, Mr. and Mrs. Prime Minister, please come with me, the officer said again, stepping aside politely. Soon, the people at the airport saw the Prime Minister and Mrs. Prime Minister surrounded by a group of police officers. They were escorted into a police car and left the airport. Television and the internet were immediately in an uproar. Countless reporters went online to find out what had happened to Prime Minister Do. At first, all the conspiracy theories on the internet were sympathetic to Prime Minister Do, a man who had started from scratch and worked his way up to the position of Prime Minister with his own abilities. But not long after, his deal with Yamaguchi Eiko was revealed, and public opinion took a 180-degree turn. Working with the Japanese Yamaguchi Gumi to manipulate the Prime Minister election. How shameless. Did they go too far? 233,333. The Prime Minister would really do anything for the election. The Prime Minister's children are all mentally handicapped, and now even his wife is mentally handicapped. Of all people, he chose a Japanese spy as his personal assistant. Almost overnight, the popular Prime Minister, who used to have high support ratings, had his popularity hit rock bottom. Some people had already started petitioning for Prime Minister Do to resign. Because Prime Minister Do was elected, no one could remove him from office except the voters. Therefore, the Senate chose people from the general public to form a grand jury to impeach Prime Minister Do. This uproar in public opinion instantly became the hottest topic in the Wuxia Empire, and the public opinion was cleverly manipulated. Gradually, it became a torrent of support for the replacement of the Prime Minister and the Minister of the Interior, Bai Jianqing. Bai Jianqing was still in Southeast Asia attending the ASEAN multilateral talks, but his popularity in the Wuxia Empire had already skyrocketed. While the people of the Secret Service, the cabinet, and the military were cheering, the Special Operations Forces remained silent. Wu Xiaoheng, Zhao Liangzi, and Yin Shixiang sat in the office, analyzing the recent events. Mr. Hua, this Yamaguchi Eiko has been exposed so thoroughly that I can't believe it. Yin Shixiang frowned as he flipped through the documents he had obtained from the Secret Service and Army. There must be something wrong. Zhao Liangzi slapped the table. Look at this evidence. It's like someone delivered a pillow to me when I was about to doze off. Prime Minister Do was set up. Wu Xiaoheng pondered for a long time and clicked on the chain of evidence with his mouse. Finally he said, actually Prime Minister Do wasn't wrongly accused. He did collude with Yamaguchi Eiko, and she did promise the Yamaguchi Gumi to support him in the election. There's no way to clear his name. That's true. Yin Shixiang nodded thoughtfully. He looked at Zhao Liangzi. Little Zhe, is Miss Bai's father going to rise to the top in one step? He was asking about Bai Yueran's father, Bai Jianqing, who was currently representing the Wuxia Empire at the ASEAN multilateral talks in Southeast Asia. Zhao Liangzi grinned from ear to ear, but pretended to be humble. Rise to the top in one step? I don't understand, but Minister Bai is indeed capable, low-key, and has a good reputation. Wu Xiaoheng glanced at him and nodded. Bai Jianqing isn't bad. As long as Zhao Liangzi didn't like Bai Shuang, it was fine. Bai Yueran and Bai Jianqing's family weren't implicated by Bai Yuxing. Zhao Liangzi was even happier now that he had received the chief's approval. However, Wu Xiaoheng still reminded him, I don't think the matter with Yamaguchi Eiko is over yet. I don't believe that the woman who died was the real Yamaguchi Eiko. This was the first night watch. The double monthly votes had begun. Dear friends, you can vote now. And recommendation votes. Oh, piss. Thank you, Huaishuan, for the immortal fate bestowed upon me yesterday. Thank you, 11, for the Heshabi bestowed upon me yesterday. 7:00 p.m. the next night. Moi. Chapter 464. It's not the real Yamaguchi Eiko? Zhao Liangzi and Yin Shixiang were shocked. Mr. Hua, what evidence do you have? Not yet. Wu Xiaoheng clenched his fist and rested it on his chin. He pulled out the photos of Yamaguchi Eiko and Yamaguchi Yuko and placed them side by side on the computer screen. Look, don't they look alike? Wu Xiaoheng gestured for Zhao Liangzi and Yin Shixiang to come over. Do you still remember Yamaguchi Yuko? Of course. Yin Shixiang immediately waved his hand. But didn't she get into a car accident in Japan? We thought she was killed by the Yamaguchi Gumi. It doesn't seem so now. Wu Xiaoheng shifted his gaze to the computer screen. We only heard about the car accident. Did anyone find the scene of the car accident? Are there any photos? Did you manage to track down her family? No. Yes, the lead on Yamaguchi Yuko was cut off after she died in the car accident. Plus, we were sure it was Yamaguchi Gumi who killed her, so it didn't matter if we didn't find any specific information about her death. Zhao Liangzi recalled the mission. So Mr. Hua is suspicious? But Yamaguchi Eiko is Yamaguchi Yuko's sister? Isn't it normal for sisters to look alike? That's possible. Wu Xiaoheng nodded. That's why we really need to investigate Yamaguchi-gumi. But Yamaguchi-gumi's security is too tight. Zhao Liangza frowned. If I remember correctly, we tried to infiltrate Yamaguchi-gumi in the past but were discovered soon after. Our members committed suicide by poison to avoid being tortured and forced to confess. Their argument was that if they fell into Yamaguchi-gumi's hands, it would be better to die. Otherwise it would be a fate worse than death. That was also a reason. Hua Xiaoheng fell into deep thought and waved at them. You can leave now. I need to think about it. Yes, Chief. Yin Shixiang and Zhao Liangza returned to their respective desks after leaving Hua Xiaoheng's office. Zhao Liangza browsed through the latest trending news online and saw how Prime Minister Dou's family was treated. He clicked his tongue and said, Prime Minister Dou is a classic case of being blinded by greed. He actually dared to work with the Yamaguchi-gumi. I bet even the Japanese politicians wouldn't dare to do that. Yin Shixiang laid on the desk and said weakly, power can drive people crazy, especially a high position like the Prime Minister. He didn't have any other help, so he definitely wanted to make use of the Yamaguchi-gumi. I didn't expect that he would have to sell his soul to make a deal with the devil. Well said. Zhao Liangza applauded vigorously and looked up to see that Yin Shixiang didn't look happy. He asked curiously, what's wrong with you? Not in a good mood? Yin Shixiang shook his head as he recalled Yamaguchi Yuko's face. He said to Zhao Liangza, Little Zay, why do you think Yamaguchi Yuko attacked Nianji that time? They all knew that Gu Nianji had once fallen for a trick, and that thing had come from Yamaguchi Yuko. Do you think that time was intentional? It wasn't a coincidence? Zhao Liangza raised his eyebrows high. But I think it was a coincidence. A rich kid was looking for someone to buy an aphrodisiac, and Yamaguchi Yuko happened to have it, so she sold it to him. But think about it, it was such an expensive and rare thing, and it just happened to be bought by that average rich kid. That in itself was unusual. It was like she was deliberately waiting for him to take the bait. Zhao Liangza also began to think about it. He got up from behind the desk and walked around the office with his arms crossed as he analyzed the situation with Yin Shixiang. If what you said is true, then the question comes back. Why would Yamaguchi Yuko, or should I say Yamaguchi-gumi, target Nianji? You think she has something to do with Yamaguchi-gumi? Yin Shixiang's expression darkened. Then doesn't that mean she can't be with Hua Xiao at all? Putting aside all other concerns, if Gu Nianji really had something to do with Yamaguchi-gumi, then no matter how deep their relationship was, they couldn't be together. Big Xiong, you're being too serious. She might not necessarily be related. Maybe she's also a victim of Yamaguchi-gumi? Yin Shixiang knocked on the table with a smile. Anything is possible. You have to be bold in your assumptions and careful in verifying them. That's true. Zhao Liangza sighed in relief. I'm really worried. Forget it, let them be. Even General Ji isn't saying anything. What use is our words? Why don't we find Nianji's father as soon as possible? Yin Shixiang turned on his computer and began to compile information about Gu Nianji's background. Just then an email was sent to his inbox. Yin Shixiang opened it casually and his eyes widened. Even his voice changed. Little Zay, come here. Come here, my ass. What do you want to say? Zhao Liangza glared at Yin Shixiang and refused to go over. Come here quickly. Yin Shixiang was so anxious he almost jumped up. South America sent us an important email. Oh? They're investigating Hijichu's family background? Zhao Liangza quickly ran over and stood behind Yin Shixiang to look at the computer screen in front of him. The email was very short. There was only one sentence. We found out that Gu Yanran's father is also called Gu Xiangguan. It was Zhao Liangza's turn to jump. What? Gu Yanran's father is also called Gu Xiangguan? Doesn't that mean Gu Yanran and Nianji are biological sisters? But they're clearly not related by blood. He snapped back to reality after jumping up and down. They're investigating Hijichu's people, right? Why are they investigating Gu Yanran? Yin Shixiang's hands flew across the keyboard as he typed. I'm confused too. Let me ask quickly. He then added, seriously, would it kill them to say one more word? Of course he was just complaining. People in their line of work could really die from saying one more word. After sending the email, Yin Shixiang immediately forwarded it to Hua Xiaoheng. Not long after, Hua Xiaoheng opened his office door and walked out. He asked with a serious expression, what's going on? How did they find out about Gu Yanran? This news connected another line of investigation that had been silent for a long time. Hua Xiao were also confused. We just sent an email to the people over there to ask. Yin Shixiang showed his email to Hua Xiaoheng. Hua Xiaoheng glanced at it and nodded. Let me know as soon as they reply. Also, he paused. Retest Gu Yanran's DNA. The last time they tested it, they had no blood relationship with Gu Nianji at all. But now they were connected by the same father. But Hua Xiao, are you sure that Gu Yanran's father, Gu Xiangwen, and Gu Nianji's father, Gu Xiangwen, are the same person? Zhao Liangzi was a computer expert after all. His programming logic was very strong and divergent. It was the second watch. The double monthly votes had begun. Dear friends, you can vote now. And recommendation votes. Oh, the first watch tomorrow was at noon, so don't worry in the morning. Moi. Chapter 465. Hua Xiaoheng crossed his arms and stood in front of the window, looking at the scenery outside. The blue sky, white clouds, and the sun shining brightly. The world was peaceful and the years were peaceful. However, the turbulent waves were faintly discernible in the distance, revealing a corner of its ferocious and huge body. Gu Yanran and Gu Nianji were connected because of the name Gu Xiangwen. Perhaps Gu Nianji's father, Gu Xiangwen, had the same name as Gu Yanran's father, but what were the chances of that? Less than 1 in 10 million. It was more likely that they were the same person, just like Yamaguchi Yuko and Yamaguchi Aiko could be the same person. If Yamaguchi Aiko hadn't appeared, Yamaguchi Yuko's incident wouldn't have alerted them. Now that Yamaguchi Aiko had appeared, it was like drawing legs on a snake, giving them another speculation. It wasn't strange for sisters to look similar, but it was strange for them to act almost the same way. Even identical twins would act differently, let alone two sisters of different ages. Then what role did Hijichu play in all of this? He came for Gu Nianji and he knew about her past, but why didn't he reveal it to her? It was useless to interrogate Hijichu. As a lawyer and a tenured professor at Harvard Law School, he had countless ways to not tell the truth, and they wouldn't be able to find any loopholes. Therefore, Hua Xiaoheng had never thought about finding out the truth from Hijichu's mouth. He only believed in the truth he found out himself. So many suspicious points intertwined in Hua Xiaoheng's mind, as if they were gradually connecting into a web, but there were always key points that couldn't be connected. Zhao Liangzi hugged his laptop and typed in all sorts of commands. He launched another Trojan horse attack on the Yamaguchi Gumi's intranet in an attempt to get more information. Yin Shixiang spun a dart in his hand, his brows furrowed as he occasionally threw it at the dartboard on the wall. Both of them looked up at Hua Xiaoheng standing at the window from time to time. His back was tall and straight like a pine tree. Just like many of his previous operations, it seemed like no problem could stump him. He was the backbone and pillar of the Special Operations Forces and everyone's belief. Hua Xiaoheng didn't know how long he had been standing by the window. They only noticed that the sun was gradually slanting to the west, covering the west-facing window with a layer of golden light. After a long time, Hua Xiaoheng turned around and looked at Zhao Liangzi and Yin Shixiang. He said calmly, "Our problem is that we've never truly interacted with Yamaguchi Yuko and Yamaguchi Aiko. These two people or this person have always been a blank slate to us." Zhao Liangzi stopped typing on the computer, and Yin Shixiang put away the darts in his hands. Both of them looked at Hua Xiaoheng nervously and asked in unison, "Mr. Hua, you want to investigate these two again?" "No." Hua Xiaoheng walked over from the window and said in a low voice, "We want to investigate her true identity." True identity? Yes, since both Yamaguchi Yuko and Yamaguchi Aiko did not find this person, then we have reason to believe that these two names are just a cover. Her real identity is someone else. Hua Xiaoheng returned to his desk and propped both hands on it. He looked up at his two personal secretaries. Zhao Liangzi and Yin Shixiang looked at each other and suddenly felt enlightened. And her target is actually Nianji, so we don't have to be led by the nose by her. Hua Xiaoheng's gaze returned to the computer screen on his desk. He took the mouse and opened a few programs. Inform the South Americans to continue the operation. This time, focus on investigating Gu Yanran. We can put Hijichu's matter aside for now. Since they had already found Gu Yanran's father, Gu Xiangwen, they should continue investigating from there. Anyway, the original intention of investigating Hijichu was to find out about Gu Nianji's background. Big Xiong, go get the DNA evidence from Gu Yanran again. This time you have to do it yourself. Hua Xiaoheng ordered Yin Shixiang. Yes, Chief. Yin Shixiang immediately turned and left Hua Xiaoheng's office to find Gu Yanran and get her DNA evidence. Little Zay, you don't have to continue probing the Yamaguchi Gumi's intranet. Hua Xiaoheng was silent for a long time before saying, "Send a letter directly to the Yamaguchi Gumi and ask about Yamaguchi Yuko and Yamaguchi Aiko, especially about Yamaguchi Yuko's car accident. Send a letter directly? Zhao Liang's eyes widened. But, that's against the rules. How are we supposed to send them a letter? Get the Wuxia Imperial Consulate General in Japan to step in. The Yamaguchi-gumi now advertises themselves as doing legitimate business. They're already clean even though they're still dirty to the bone. Huo Xiaoheng's lips curled into a mocking smile. So send an official letter to ask about it officially. Yes, Chief. Zhao Liangzi quickly returned to his office and began contacting the Wuxia Imperial Consulate General in Japan. He had yet to contact the person from the Consulate General in Japan when Yin Shixiang pushed open the door and walked in with a strange expression on his face. Wuxiao, I just found out that Gu Yanran returned to Barbados. Her private plane took off 4 hours ago and has long since left the national border. Yin Shixiang placed the airport information in front of Huo Xiaoheng. Look at this time. It's when Prime Minister Dou and his people got into an accident. They were all at the Imperial Capital Airport at the time. What a coincidence. Zhao Liangzi also walked over and looked at the information Yin Shixiang had found. What should we do? Find out who the people she randomly brought with her were. I want detailed information. Huo Xiaoheng ordered Zhao Liangzi to contact the General Administration of Customs to obtain Gu Yanran's exit documents and security records. 10 minutes later, the relevant departments of the General Administration of Customs found Gu Yanran's exit records and sent them to the Special Operations Force's special email. Zhao Liangzi printed out the information of everyone who followed Gu Yanran out of the country and sent it to Huo Xiaoheng's desk, including their photos. There were 5 people who followed Gu Yanran out of the country. 2 housekeepers, 1 man and 1 woman, and 3 bodyguards, all men. Zhao Liangzi placed the documents in front of Huo Xiaoheng. These are their photos and photocopies of their passports. Huo Xiaoheng flipped through them one by one, his eyes finally landing on the photo of Gu Yanran's middle-aged housekeeper. He picked out the photo and pushed it in front of Zhao Liangzi. Do a digital analysis and remove her black-rimmed glasses to see who it is. Zhao Liangzi quickly transcoded the photo and entered it into his analysis program. However, the other party was obviously well prepared. After a careful digital analysis, the middle-aged woman who appeared in front of them was someone they had never seen before. It wasn't Yamaguchi Aiko they had imagined. Wuxiao, this person is either not Yamaguchi Aiko or she's more powerful than we thought. Zhao Liangzi enlarged the photo after the digital analysis and projected it on the big screen in the office. Look, there's no trace of disguise on her face. It's either real or her technology is more advanced than ours. As far as I know, the only country more advanced than us in this area is the United States. This person is the focus of the interrogation. Yin Shixiang shook his head. Unfortunately, they left our country. Huo Xiaoheng smiled. That's exactly what I wanted. Zhao Liangzi and Yin Shixiang's minds raced. They immediately understood what Huo Xiaoheng meant and laughed together. Ah, I understand. Yin Shixiang and Zhao Liangzi high-fived each other in the air and said with a smile, if she was still in the country, what we could do would be too limited. But she left the Wuxia Empire. For us, it's like fish in the ocean and birds in the sky. The Special Operations Forces had unlimited ability to move outside the Wuxia Empire's borders and were not restricted by any laws. This was because their battlefield had never been within the Wuxia Empire's borders. Within the Wuxia Empire, their actions were severely restricted and could not overstep their boundaries. Therefore, their actions within the Wuxia Empire were often restricted and could not do as they pleased. Only by placing the battlefield outside the Wuxia Empire's borders would they have countless methods to achieve their goals. The next day, the Wuxia Empire's Consulate General in Japan that Zhao Liangzi had contacted replied. The results were shocking. The Yamaguchi-gumi denied that Yamaguchi Yuko or Yamaguchi Aiko was one of them and flatly denied that they had attempted to interfere with the Wuxia Empire's election. Wuxiao, is Yamaguchi-gumi's reply true or false? Zhao Liangzi and Yin Shixiang did not believe the Japanese Yamaguchi-gumi's reply, even though they had originally disagreed with Huo Xiaoheng's request to send a formal letter to the Yamaguchi-gumi. Huo Xiaoheng sat at his desk and looked at the Yamaguchi-gumi's reply that the Consulate General in Japan had forwarded to him. He was silent for a long time. I'm going to see General G. Connect me to General G's phone. After a long time, Huo Xiaoheng finally broke the silence. As he tidied up the documents on his desk, he said, "Get ready and be on standby." This was the first watch. December was the last day of the double monthly votes. Everyone hurry up and cast your monthly votes. Once it expires, it will be invalid. And recommendation votes. Oh, and thank you, Yunhan and Yuqin, for tipping the Heshibi yesterday. 7 o'clock the next night. Chapter 466. Yin Shixiang quickly contacted General Ji's personal secretary. Hua Xiao wants to speak with General Ji. May I know when General Ji will be available? Half an hour later, General Ji called. Xiaoheng, what's up? Hua Xiaoheng replied curtly, General Ji, there's something I'd like to discuss with you in person. His tone was cautious. General Ji immediately replied, when can you come over? I'm fine now. No. Hua Xiaoheng hung up and turned to order. Prepare the car. We're going to the Supreme Military Council. Half an hour later, Hua Xiaoheng arrived at General Ji's office in a private car. Placing the documents in front of General Ji, Hua Xiaoheng briefed him on Yamaguchi Aiko's situation and the official response from the Yamaguchi Gumi. He then explained his speculations and finally made a suggestion. General Ji, I'd like to personally go to South America. General Ji looked at Hua Xiaoheng with a serious expression. Xiaoheng, your status is different now. You're no longer a member of the special forces fighting on the front lines. Do you have a special reason to do this personally? In General Ji's opinion, this matter could be carried out by the special forces in South America. Hua Xiaoheng had already prepared his answer. General Ji, this matter concerns Gu Xiangguan, Gu Nianji, and the He family of the underground godfathers of South America. It's a serious matter and I'd like to go personally to be reassured. General Ji put on his reading glasses and began flipping through the evidence. The more he read, the more his brows furrowed. You suspect that the personal assistant who died with Mrs. Doe wasn't the real Yamaguchi Aiko? Yes, but we have no evidence. Hua Xiaoheng answered honestly. I speculate that they've already left the country, so it's a good time to resolve this matter. General Ji nodded. Foreign countries are your battlefields and are not governed by the Empire's laws. We've never asked about your actions abroad. This is the original intention of the Special Forces. Hua Xiaoheng sat up straight with his hands on his knees. His expression was very serious. Everything we do is for the benefit of the Huaxia Empire and the safety of its citizens. I'm not questioning your motives. General Ji quickly comforted Hua Xiaoheng. But Xiaoheng, you have to think carefully. You're already the highest commander. As the commander, your job is to make arrangements and not rush to the front lines. Your safety is the top priority of the Special Operations Forces. Do you really want to go yourself? Hua Xiaoheng closed his eyes and nodded. I know, but I think that as the Supreme Commander, not only must I have the ability to command, but I must also have the ability to be on the front lines. Everyone in the Special Operations Forces needs to be able to move up and down. Also, since the Special Operations Forces has been established, I can't just rely on myself. We have our own backup plan. When I'm absent, please take my place. This way we can ensure the smooth operation of the organization. Hua Xiaoheng's words made sense. Although he was important, without him, the Special Operations Forces would not be able to function. That would actually be a failure of his work. General Ji pondered for a long time before finally nodding. Okay, I support your decision. Arrange the follow-up work. I'll wait for your good news. Thank you, Chief. Hua Xiaoheng stood up and saluted before turning to leave. Returning to his own Special Operations Forces headquarters, Hua Xiaoheng ordered Yin Shixiang and Zhao Liangzi. Find the invitation letter for the Cuban military exchange. We will represent the military and accept their invitation. Yin Shixiang and Zhao Liangzi understood that Hua Xiaoheng was going to go personally. They immediately advised him like General Ji. Mr. Hua, we can handle this. You don't have to go, right? Hua Xiaoheng ignored them and returned to his desk. He said dryly, we'll depart tomorrow. Get ready. He didn't want to waste any more time. Yin Shixiang and Zhao Liangzi could only reply loudly, yes, Chief. Because it was a last-minute decision to visit Cuba as a military delegation, Yin Shixiang and Zhao Liangzi mobilized almost everyone in the secretariat to prepare. Hua Xiaoheng worked almost all night in his office before he finished reviewing all the important documents and forwarded them to General Ji. At 6 in the morning, the imperial capital was still shrouded in the morning mist. Hua Xiaoheng walked out of his office and sighed deeply on the balcony. He put on his Bluetooth headset and said, pick up Gu Nianji. The Bluetooth headset's automatic dialing program immediately found Gu Nianji's number. Gu Nianji was still sleeping in her dorm. She had been rushing out a thesis yesterday and had only gone to bed around 1 or 2 in the morning. She was sound asleep at 6 in the morning. The phone's ringtone echoed in her room but didn't wake her up. Hua Xiaoheng heard the phone ring for a long time and finally went to voicemail. He knew Gu Nianji was still sleeping. He thought about it and returned to his office to put on his casual clothes. He asked Fan Jian to drive him to university. It was 7 in the morning when his car arrived at the new dormitory for female graduate students. Many students had already woken up and were heading to the cafeteria for breakfast. Although Gu Nianji was still sleeping, her usual biological clock woke her up gradually. She didn't want to move, so she closed her eyes and lay on the bed, enjoying the aftertaste and pleasure of sleeping in. Priest, temple, war, bow and arrow, whose past did they belong to? I like the image of you only belonging to me in the crowd. Hua Xiaoheng's phone rang again. It was almost like a shot of adrenaline, stimulating Gu Nianji to open her eyes. She grabbed the phone from the bedside table and said, "Hello." Hua Xiaoheng sat in the car and listened to Gu Nianji's lazy morning voice. He smiled and said in a low voice, "Nianji, come down. I'm downstairs." Oh. Gu Nianji was surprised and happy. She put on her nightgown and got up from the bed. She walked to the window and looked down. Sure enough, she saw the familiar car. "Wuxiao, wait for me. I'll be right down." Gu Nianji quickly changed her clothes and draped her hair over her shoulders. Hua Xiaoheng's car was parked in the temporary parking lot in front of the dormitory building. It could only be parked there for 15 minutes during the day. "Wuxiao, why are you here? Is something the matter?" Gu Nianji asked anxiously as soon as she got in the car. She knew Hua Xiaoheng wouldn't normally come looking for her at this time. "Nothing." Hua Xiaoheng turned to look at her and tucked a strand of her long hair behind her ear. "I have an official visit soon." Was he here to see her before he left? Gu Nianji's heart suddenly filled with sweetness, but it was quickly replaced by reluctance to part. She snuggled against Hua Xiaoheng's chest and whispered, "Hua Xiao, how long will you be gone?" Hua Xiaoheng allowed her to lean against him and said motionlessly, "It's hard to say. I'll be back when I'm done." This time he should be able to return with answers about Gu Nianji's background. When he came back, the last barrier between them would be gone. Gu Nianji knew that Hua Xiaoheng's work was confidential, so she shouldn't have asked any questions. But who would pay attention to that now that things had come to this? She was worried about him and missed him. It was fine to ask, right? Hua Xiaoheng wouldn't answer her directly anyway. "Okay, you take care. I'll wait for you to come back." Gu Nianji looked up and paused before saying, "Hua Xiao, can I see you off?" "No need." Hua Xiaoheng stroked her hair. "Just take care of yourself." "I'll be very good," Gu Nianji quickly promised. "You have to be careful." That was what she was most worried about. Hua Xiaoheng looked down at her red lips and really wanted to kiss them. But Fan Jian was sitting in the front row, so he couldn't do anything too out of line with Gu Nianji. "Okay, wait for my news." Hua Xiaoheng tightened his grip on Gu Nianji's hand. "Go back. I have to go." His time was measured in seconds. Although Gu Nianji was reluctant to leave, she still used all her willpower to leave Hua Xiaoheng's side. She got out of the car and stood on the steps in front of the dorm building. Watching Hua Xiaoheng's car gradually drive away, Gu Nianji felt that her heart had already left with Hua Xiaoheng. She returned to the dorm gloomily and threw herself on the bed. Hugging her panda pillow, she looked depressed and didn't want to get up for a long time. Ma Qiqi knocked on her door and loudly reminded her, "Nianji, come out for breakfast. Do you have class in the morning?" Gu Nianji remembered that she still had to go to Hijichu's office suite, so she pursed her lips and got up from the bed. She washed up and carried her backpack to Hijichu's room. Hijichu could tell that Gu Nianji was in a bad mood when she walked in. Hijichu quietly placed a bottle of fresh milk in front of her. "What's wrong? Did something happen?" Gu Nianji took the milk and looked down at the straw. She didn't speak for a long time. "Did you get into a fight with Hua Xiaoheng?" Hijichu couldn't help but ask. It was the second watch. December was the last day of double monthly votes. Everyone hurry up and cast your monthly votes. It'll be invalid after the expiration. And recommendation votes. Oh, and moi. Chapter 467. Gu Nianji shook her head and replied listlessly. "Oh. Then what's wrong?" Hijichu's shimmering sultry eyes were filled with concern, but his tightly pursed lips appeared extremely cold. "Nothing, it's just a periodic depression. I'll be fine after this period of time." Gu Nianji was already familiar with Hijichu's slightly contradictory temperament of being cold on the outside and warm on the inside. She looked up and forced a smile. "Your period?" Hijichu raised a brow. "You can rest for a few days if you're not feeling well." Gu Nianji was speechless and didn't dare look up at Hijichu's eyes. She replied awkwardly, "No, that's not what I meant." Hijichu knew he misunderstood and was also a bit embarrassed. He walked to the kitchen and brought over a small plate of muffins. Have some muffins. I remember you said this brand was the best last time. Gunyanji looked at it and saw it was her favorite brand. She pursed her lips and reached for a piece to eat slowly. She drank some warm milk and felt much better. Hijichu could see that Gunyanji had something on her mind, but since she didn't want to talk about it, he didn't bring it up again and changed the topic to Gunyanji's studies and work. Nyenji, you're doing very well with your studies and teaching assistant job. Have you thought about finding time to intern at a law firm? Hijichu took out a stack of cases and placed it in front of her. Take a look when you have time. Not only are there internal Wuxia cases but there are also foreign cases. I hope that if you have time, you can try to take the American bar exam as well. That way you can also apply for the American bar license. This was a good suggestion. Gunyanji already had the Wuxia Imperial Bar license. If she could also get the American bar license, she would have even more options in the future. Gunyanji's heart warmed and she quickly said, the American bar is divided by state. Many states require American credits. I'm afraid I don't qualify. New York State doesn't require American credits. They also accept foreign law credits. If you want to take the exam, send your transcript to their designated International Transcript Evaluation Agency for evaluation and convert it into the equivalent of American credits. Once you meet the requirements, you can take the exam. Hijichu was very familiar with this area, so he explained it in an orderly manner. I see, I haven't thought about it carefully. But if Professor he thinks I can give it a try, I can go back and prepare. Since Hua Xiaoheng was going on a mission, Gunyanji had more time. She also wanted to find something to keep herself busy so that she wouldn't have to think about Hua Xiaoheng all day. Yes, your grades will definitely meet their requirements. Also, your English is much better than your classmates, just like your mother tongue. Hijichu picked up his coffee and stared at Gunyanji through the rising steam. Gunyanji hesitated for a moment and remembered that Hijichu had said he would ask people related to her past. She had been waiting patiently for the past few days, but Hijichu hadn't made a single move. She finally asked, Professor last time you said you would help me ask about the people related to my parentage. How are they doing now? Do you really want to know? Hijichu looked down and didn't look at Gunyanji's eager eyes. But your memory still hasn't recovered. Even if I told you, would you believe me? Gunyanji, this was indeed a problem. She knew that apart from Hua Xiaoheng, she wouldn't easily believe anything anyone said, including Hijichu. However, Hijichu gave her a sense of familiarity and security. Unknowingly, she had already trusted Hijichu more than she had in the beginning. Of course, this kind of trust wasn't enough for her to unreservedly believe everything Hijichu said. But it was always good to have more clues, wasn't it? She could analyze it herself and use reasoning to come to a conclusion. Even if she couldn't recover her memory, she would be able to know what was going on. She didn't want to continue like before, where her heart was like duckweed, floating in circles without a base. Gunyanji picked up the warm milk and took a few more sips. The warm milk warmed her stomach and calmed her emotions. She looked up and stared at Hijichu. As long as you say it, I have a brain and can analyze it myself to see if it's true or false. Of course, Hijichu wasn't satisfied with this answer, but what could he do? He could only take it one step at a time. It would be great if Gunyanji could recover her memory, but the medical conditions here probably wouldn't be enough for her to recover. Anyway, she just needed an identity that he knew through and through. It was an emergency, so he'd leave it at that for now. Hijichu crossed his legs and sat on the large single-seater sofa. He glanced at Gunyanji and took out his phone to dial a number. After a long time, the other side finally picked up. Lawyer why are you calling me at this hour? What's the matter? Gu Yanran's slightly raspy voice came from the other end of the line. It naturally had a hint of languid charm. Hijichu looked at the caller GPS on his phone and was a bit surprised. You're not in the Wuxia Empire? Yes, I went back to Barbados the day before yesterday. Gu Yanran lay on the balcony of her bedroom in Barbados and enjoyed the cool breeze that chased away the heat of the day. She was actually in the mood to joke. What's wrong? Lawyer do you miss me? Hijichu's lips twitched and his shimmering, sultry eyes flashed. Yes, I miss you. You're a big client of our firm. Everyone misses you. Gu Yanran giggled and straightened her tropical silk gown. Lawyer you've gone too far. So you're not thinking about me but about my business? Miss Gu, you're being too polite. Hijichu's voice softened and was no longer as cold. He spoke to Gu Yanran with some politeness that he didn't have with other people. We've known each other for so many years. Whether it's personal or business, we know each other better than others. I know. That's why I dared to joke with you, Lawyer He. Gu Yanran changed her position on the recliner. Okay, Lawyer He, just say what you want to say. He Jichu nodded. Okay, then I won't stand on ceremony. He hesitated for a few seconds before taking out his other phone and pulling out a file. He looked at the screen and said to Gu Yanran, Miss Gu, when you became a client of our law firm 7 years ago, you asked us to be your representative lawyer and help you handle legal matters related to your sister, Gu Nianji, right? Gu Nianji was confused and didn't know what He Jichu was laying out. It wasn't until He Jichu said this that she jerked her head up and instinctively covered her mouth. She looked at He Jichu in shock, and his words kept replaying in her mind. Help you deal with legal matters related to your sister, Gu Nianji? Help you deal with legal matters related to your sister, Gu Nianji? Who was this Miss Gu? Could it be Gu Yanran? Gu Nianji remembered that Gu Yanran had once told her that she had a younger sister named Gu Nianji. She had even told Hua Xiaoheng at the time, but after their investigation, they discovered that they weren't related by blood, so she didn't think too much about it. There were so many people in the world anyway, so it wasn't uncommon for people to have the same name. However, when this question came out of He Jichu's mouth, it had a different meaning. Because Gu Nianji already had a preconceived notion that He Jichu knew about her past. So after all the twists and turns, her past still had something to do with Gu Yanran? Gu Yanran was also a bit surprised on the other end of the phone. She wore her headset and looked up at the night sky of Barbados. Stars twinkled in the dark blue sky, and the broad-leaved tropical plants on the edge of the balcony swayed quietly in the sea breeze. The sound of crashing waves came from nearby, and there was also the chirping of unknown insects nearby. Sitting there alone, it seemed like she was the only person in the world. It was lonely at the top. Miss Gu? He Jichu waited for a long time, but Gu Yanran still didn't speak, so he could only urge her again. Gu Yanran composed herself and said quietly, Yes, 7 years ago something happened to my parents and I rushed to deal with it. My sister, who was only 12 at the time, was left alone in Barbados. However, she went missing when she went out to sea. I couldn't find her anywhere, so I gave full authority to your law firm to help me handle the relevant matters. All these years, I've contacted many world-renowned detective agencies and even cooperated with the American and Barbados police, but I still couldn't find a trace of my sister. He Jichu smiled, his cool voice carrying an indescribable pressure. Yes, Miss Gu, it's been almost 7 years. For a missing person, there was a completely different boundary between 7 years old and almost 7 years old. According to the laws of many countries, if a person went missing for 7 years, then they could be considered legally dead. The case of Gu Yanran's sister, Gu Nianji, still hadn't been closed. However, if she couldn't be found after 7 years, then the case would automatically be considered legally dead. This was the first update. Today was 2017, so I'd like to wish everyone a happy new year. Hurry up and vote for your guaranteed monthly votes. It's still double now. And recommendation votes. Oh, and thank you, President Gu for the immortal love fate yesterday. Mwah. Today was the third update. At 1 p.m., I'd add an update to the immortal love fate bestowed by Huaishuan, my president, on December 29th. At 7 p.m. on the third update. Chapter 468. Gu Yanran understood what He Jichu was implying and was a bit angry. She straightened up from the recliner and said unhappily, What do you mean, Lawyer He? I want to find my sister more than anyone else, but I can't find her. What can I do? Really? He Jichu smiled again and said slowly, Since you're a big client of our law firm, my assistant when Shui was your lawyer. Now that she's gone, I'm her boss. I think I can take over and help you continue investigating your sister's whereabouts. Gu Yanran was very suspicious. She had an idea in her mind, but she wasn't sure. Holding a golden jackfruit in her hand, she asked in a roundabout way, Lawyer He, do you have my sister's whereabouts? You must be careful about this. The Gus were wealthy in Barbados, so not any random person could pretend to be Gu Yanran's sister. I know, so I wanted to ask you, who was your sister's previous family doctor? Who was the dentist? He Jichu wanted to verify her identity through Gu Yanran's sister's medical and dental records. Gu Nianji's heart froze again when she heard this. A DNA test? It was useless. They had already tested it. Gu Nianji didn't dwell on this and shook her head lightly at He Jichu. He Jichu saw her movement and gestured for her to calm down before continuing to listen to Gu Yanran's answer. Gu Yanran was stunned for a moment before saying, The same family doctor and dentist as me. Lawyer He, do you need their contact information? Yes, send it to me. I'll ask them. Hijichu picked up his other phone to record their contact information. Gu Yanran nodded. Then I'll send it to you. She found the phone number and address of her family doctor and dentist on her phone and sent them to Hijichu. After sending it, she felt very tired and stood up from the recliner. It's getting late. I need to rest. Good night, Lawyer He. It was daytime in the Wuxia Empire, but it was nighttime in Barbados and Central America. Hijichu replied, Good night, sleep well. Hijichu hung up the phone and looked up to see Gunyenji's disapproving expression. He cocked his head and said, You definitely wouldn't believe me if I told you directly, so I found the evidence one by one and placed it in front of you. You have a brain and can judge whether it's true or not. Then I'll wait and see. Gunyenji smiled and didn't remind Hijichu that He Xiaoheng had already run a DNA test. He was repeating the wrong path. She couldn't divulge anything about He Xiaoheng, even if it was something closely related to her. 12 hours later, at the Cuba International Airport in South America, the honor guards of the three armed forces lined up neatly at the airport, waiting for the arrival of the highest representative of the Wuxia Empire. He Xiaoheng was using his identity as the Deputy Secretary General of the Wuxia Empire's Supreme Military Council for this visit. This was also his public identity. As for the identity of the commander of the Special Operations Forces, it was still a taboo that no one could verify. Last year, He Xiaoheng had secretly taken a nuclear submarine to Cuba to solve Bai Yuxing's problem. This time, however, he was making an official visit to Cuba as the Deputy Secretary General of the Wuxia Empire's Supreme Military Council. The plane he was on was painted with a dragon in flight. The dragon's head was ferocious, and its mouth was wide open to reveal an eagle inside. The chief of the Wuxia Empire's Supreme Military Council has arrived. As the cabin door opened, the leader of the honor guards of the three armed forces in Cuba shouted. The sonorous and powerful Wuxia Empire's national anthem rang out above the Cuban airport. Flocks of white pigeons flew into the blue sky, and their whistles echoed in the blue sky, complementing the military anthem. He Xiaoheng appeared at the cabin door in his dark green Wuxia Empire general uniform. He was tall and stalwart, and his back was as straight as a pine tree. Under the military cap, his handsome face shone in the sunlight. Waves of infatuated screams and gasps could be heard in the airport. The Wuxia Empire's female exchange students, who had originally been brought here to make up the numbers, cheered wildly from the bottom of their hearts. Welcome Major General Hua. Welcome Major General Hua. Welcome Major General Hua. The tanned, beautiful and unrestrained Cuban girls immediately sang and danced, their burning gazes constantly glancing at He Xiaoheng's face. He Xiaoheng stood at the cabin door and raised his hand to the airport's honor guards and cheering crowd. He waved slowly and wore a proper official smile as he steadily walked down the red-carpeted stairs. Major General Hua, we meet again. Vactero, the supreme leader of the Cuban Revolutionary Army, smiled and extended his right hand to He Xiaoheng. He greeted him in half-baked Chinese. He Xiaoheng shook his hand and said politely in Cuban, Marshal Vactero, it's an honor to meet you. Vactero was overjoyed and quickly switched back to Cuban. Major General Hua, you can actually speak Cuban? He Xiaoheng smiled and shook his head. My Cuban proficiency is the same as your Mandarin proficiency. The two looked at each other and smiled. They turned to the honor guards of the three armed forces and entered their respective cars to begin the inspection. The Cuban Revolutionary Army's honor guards inherited the unrestrained characteristics of the Central and South American people. They were enthusiastic but not orderly, and their coordination was much worse than the Wuxia Imperial Honor Guards. Of course, He Xiaoheng wouldn't be picky about other people's troops. On the contrary, he hoped that other people's soldiers were as pampered as possible. They didn't have to suffer a little, and it would be best if they didn't train because they were afraid of heat stroke. That way everyone could be good friends. After the inspection of the honor guards, He Xiaoheng and the delegation checked into a luxurious 5-star hotel in Havana, the capital of Cuba. They were all on the same side, so it would be more convenient for him to change his identity. Mr. Hua, the official schedule for today is over. What do you plan to do? Zhao Liangzi stood in front of He Xiaoheng with the iPad he had modified and escaped from prison, waiting for his orders. He Xiaoheng stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling window with his hands behind his back and looked out at the vast ocean view. The sea was so blue it was almost green and the sky was a little gloomy. It wasn't as blue as usual, but it was also the color of a robin's egg. It complemented the sea and sky perfectly. It was almost impossible to tell the boundary between the sky and the sea. He didn't turn around and said, What about the people from South America? Find a way to get them to meet. Roger, Chief. Zhao Liangzi accepted the order and went to make arrangements. The Special Operations Forces personnel in South America couldn't meet them directly, nor could they let them meet Hua Xiaoheng. They couldn't even let them meet Zhao Liangzi and Yin Shixiang. They needed a middleman. This middleman was a military officer from the Huaxia Imperial Consulate General in Cuba. His surname was Fei, and his military rank was only Lieutenant Colonel. They all called him Lieutenant Colonel Fei. Lieutenant Colonel Fei's secret identity was actually from the Special Operations Forces, but even the people from the Consulate General didn't know about it. At sunset, Hua Xiaoheng put on a pair of sunglasses and changed into a khaki camouflage hunting suit. He carried a large hunting bag and walked into a small bar in Havana with Zhao Liangzi and Yin Shixiang. This was a gathering place for all sorts of people in Havana. There were many people dressed like them, many of whom had returned from hunting in the African savanna. They were carrying their trophies and bragging in the bar. The hunting bag that Hua Xiaoheng and his men carried actually contained a disassembled anti-material sniper rifle. If needed, the three of them could assemble 3 anti-material sniper rifles in 5 seconds. They were indestructible within a diameter of 1 kilometer. The voluptuous waitress in the bar led them to a table by the window. She served them Havana special wine and 3 cut Havana cigars. Hua Xiaoheng picked up the thick Havana cigar and rolled it in his hand. He covered the wine glass with his other hand and quickly scanned the bar. The bar was built with logs. There were a few old posters on the wall behind the counter and a rudder hanging in the middle of the posters. Polished wine glasses hung upside down above the counter, and several bottles of wine were placed in dark brown wine cabinets. The old gramophone played disco music popular in the last century. Time seemed to stop in Havana, and the passage of time was invisible. The men in 2s and 3s spoke Cuban dialects with strong accents. Some spoke English while others spoke Spanish. 2 Asian men in floral short-sleeved shirts and knee-length shorts were seated at the table next to them. They were having a drunken drinking competition, but their words were miraculously transmitted to the Bluetooth headsets worn by Hua Xiaoheng, Yin Shixiang, and Zhao Liangzi. One of the 2 men was Lieutenant Colonel Fei in disguise. The other man was undoubtedly a member of the Special Operations Forces in South America. This was the second update. It was a reward for Huaishuan, my president, on December 29th. Dear friends, hurry up and vote for your guaranteed monthly votes. It's still double now. And recommendation votes. At 7 o'clock in the evening. Everyone give your monthly votes today. We'll continue tomorrow. Chapter 469. Now that it's 2017, let's work hard together and give the Major General a better result. I'm in charge of writing and you guys are in charge of voting, okay? As long as you guys can vote for the Major General, I'll maintain more updates. Important things must be repeated 3 times. Please vote for 2 monthly votes. Please vote for 2 monthly votes. Please vote for 2 monthly votes. Moi. Chapter 470. How did you find out about Gu Yanran's father? Didn't you want to investigate Old He's family? The disguised Lieutenant Colonel Fei deliberately spoke in the dialect of a mountain village in northern Hua Nation. It wasn't difficult for people from the Huaxia Empire to understand, but it was very difficult for foreigners who knew a little Mandarin. The Special Operations Forces member used the same dialect to explain, drunkenly. That was definitely a coincidence. We were going to Old He's house that day, but we saw that Old He's family had sent a lot of people to the hospital to pick up a patient. It was such a big show and we were curious, so we went to find out who the patient was. Do you know who it was? How would I know if you didn't tell me? Lieutenant Colonel Fei glared at the person angrily and wanted to pour wine on his face. That name was Kevin Koo. At the time, we thought it looked really familiar and immediately remembered that it was a name that our boss had asked us to investigate. When we looked closely at the hospital's admission records, we realized that it was the famous Gu Yanran's father. Are you sure? It wasn't the same name? Kevin Koo isn't a special name, is it? Of course it wasn't special, but the family name on the admission records was Koo, which is Gu Yanran's English name. There was also her contact information, including phone number and home address. If it was just a coincidence that the name was the same, then how could the phone number and home address be the same as Gu Yanran's information? He had originally thought that Gu Xiangguan was most likely no longer in this world. He didn't expect him to still be alive. He glanced at Zhao Liangzi. Zhao Liangzi understood and immediately used his Bluetooth headset to send a Morse code to Lieutenant Colonel Fei. Lieutenant Colonel Fei was also wearing a Bluetooth headset. When he heard Zhao Liang's coded message, he quickly asked Zhao Liang's question. Then what kind of illness did Mr. Gu have? You should know, right? Since he had gotten his medical records, he should know what illness he had, right? Chapter 471. Hua Xiaoheng stared in Zhao Liang's direction, but his eyes were unfocused. After a while he finally said, "What does this plane crash have to do with Gu Xiangwen? Was he on that plane? If he was on that plane, how could he have become a vegetable? According to the information the Special Operations Forces received 7 years ago, no one on that plane survived. Yes, I went there with my colleagues that time." Yin Shixiang was also surprised. Because there were citizens of the Wuxia Empire on the plane, Hua Xiao asked me to go to the island with the people from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs to help with the aftermath. That plane crash happened mysteriously. The plane suddenly disappeared from radar and didn't go where it was supposed to go. Almost all the major countries on Blue Planet sent out ships and satellites to search for it, but they found nothing after more than half a year. In the end, 2 years later, someone found the wreckage of the plane on a small island in the Indian Ocean. From the situation at the scene, even if there were survivors when the plane crashed, it was only discovered 2 years later. Those who didn't die at the time must have died from their injuries 2 years later. Think about it, if a plane fell from the sky, how could anyone be unharmed? Yin Shixiang said as he pulled up the information from the scene. He took many photos, made detailed records and carefully cleaned up the scene. However, only the wreckage of the people on the plane was left. They spent a lot of effort to use the DNA of the anxiously waiting family members to confirm the remains. Then they were transported back to the Wuxia Empire for burial. Hua Xiaoheng was also thinking about the plane crash. He thought for a long time and said, "I remember that we found all the citizens of our country, no remains were left behind." "Yes, we found all the citizens of our country," Yin Shixiang replied quickly. "But if Gu Xiangwen was on that plane, he wasn't a citizen of our country, so it's possible that he wasn't detected. That means we don't know about Gu Xiangwen's condition." Zhao Liangzi looked at Hua Xiaoheng. "Hua Xiao, what do you want to do?" Hua Xiaoheng quickly made a decision and began to give orders. "First, little Zhe, immediately find a way to find the passenger list of MH210. First, we have to confirm that Gu Xiangwen was on that plane." "Yes, Chief." Zhao Liangzi made a mental note of his mission and prepared to return to his room to use his personal computer to look for loopholes in Southeast Asia's MH Airlines network. From there, he would be able to access their intranet and search for flight records from 7 years ago. Second, Big Xiong, go through the aftermath of the funeral on the island in the Indian Ocean. See if there are any anomalies or omissions. "Yes, Chief." Yin Shixiang also noted down his mission and searched for the memo in his portable electronic device. Thirdly, I want to personally go to the hospital that Gu Xiangwen just left to investigate. The third rule was an order Hua Xiaoheng had given himself. Yin Shixiang and Zhao Liangzi looked at each other and said in unison, "Mr. Hua will go with you." They would not allow Hua Xiaoheng to act alone. Hua Xiaoheng was no longer an ordinary member of the Special Operations Forces. His safety was linked to the lives of tens of thousands of Special Operations Forces members around the world. Hua Xiaoheng looked down and sighed. "Okay, you guys finish your mission first. I'll go make arrangements for going to Barbados." "Mr. Hua, what identity are you going to disguise as this time?" Yin Shixiang asked excitedly. "Barbados is a small place, but I heard the girls are very passionate." "You only know about girls?" Zhao Liangzi looked at Yin Shixiang with disdain. "Mr. Hua, can we not bring this idiot?" Hua Xiaoheng pursed his lips and smiled. "This time we'll go under official identities. Big Xiong, go contact the Barbados government and tell them that the Wuxia Empire's Supreme Council respects the Barbados People's Army and wants to interact with them." Yin Shixiang said, "What's there to respect about the Barbados Army? Do ants dare to compete with elephants?" "The Barbados government has always wanted to be on good terms with the Wuxia Empire so they can do business with us. They want to sell their most famous rum directly to the Wuxia Empire." Hua Xiaoheng ignored Yin Shixiang's jokes. "Hurry up and contact them. If they can't find a reason, make up one that they can accept. In short, we have to openly and officially visit Barbados." Zhao Liangzi volunteered. "Mr. Hua, I'll contact the Empire and ask General Ji and Speaker Long for authorization." "Okay." Hua Xiaoheng nodded. "Hurry up. This time tomorrow, I want to stand at the Barbados airport to inspect their honor guard." "Yes, Chief." Yin Shixiang and Zhao Liangzi stopped laughing and solemnly saluted as they accepted the order. Zhao Liangzi and Yin Shixiang worked very efficiently. 2 hours later, Zhao Liangzi had already hacked into the Southeast Asian MH Airlines intranet and obtained the passenger list of flight MH210 from 7 years ago. Kevin Ku's name was impressively on it. This list was identical to the passenger list the Wuxia Imperial Embassy had obtained from MH Airlines 7 years ago. After comparing the two, there was no doubt that Gu Xiangwen had been on that flight. Yin Shixiang also reorganized the situation at the time and still couldn't find any loopholes. Mr. Hua, this was the situation at the time. The plane crashed on the island, and the airline announced that none of the passengers survived. The insurance company even issued a huge compensation. However, Yin Shixiang also said, but because Gu Xiangwen wasn't a citizen of our country, his name wasn't on the list the insurance company gave us, and there was no compensation for him. This is normal. If you want to know if the insurance company compensated the Gus, you have to check the insurance company's intranet. Yin Shixiang shifted his gaze to Zhao Liangzi. I'll need little Zay's help on this. Zhao Liangzi rolled his eyes and laughed. Do I need you to tell me that? I already went to the Swiss reinsurance company that guaranteed MH Airline at the time and took a look at the insurance compensation list. As he spoke, he opened the list and presented it on his laptop. Mr. Ho, look. The Gus did receive a huge compensation. Huh. If Gu Xiangwen didn't die, then wouldn't Gu Yanran be suspected of insurance fraud? Yin Shixiang's eyes lit up. Then should we inform the Swiss reinsurance company? Hua Xiaoheng didn't speak. He took all the information from Zhao Liangzi and Yin Shixiang and read it carefully from beginning to end. His brows furrowed even tighter. Finally he said, did you notice that the Swiss reinsurance company's compensation to the Gus was the family limit, not the individual limit? Is there a difference? Yin Shixiang looked curiously. Isn't it just the Gus? No, overseas insurance is divided into individual, single parent and child and family insurance. Hua Xiaoheng was actually very familiar with this area. He continued to explain, and family insurance is the type of insurance that covers the husband and wife and all of their children. Zhao Liangzi thought about it for a while. His logical thinking as the best programmer came into play again. Mr. Hua means that Gu Xiangwen wasn't alone on the plane at the time? There was someone else from the Gus on the plane? Yes. Hua Xiaoheng looked up and began typing his analysis into the computer. According to the analysis of the situation we know now, Gu Yanran wasn't on the plane because she's still alive. And if her younger sister is Gu Nianji, she wasn't on the plane at the time. Yin Shixiang carefully looked at the evidence and suddenly found something interesting. Mr. Hua, look. The day Nianji appeared was the day that flight MH210 crashed. Yes, so Nianji wasn't on the plane at the time. Both of her daughters weren't on the plane, but the Swiss reinsurance company paid for the family insurance. Gu Yanran also accepted the compensation generously. We can deduce that Gu Xiangwen's wife was with him at the time, and his wife probably died. So the Swiss reinsurance company paid for the family insurance according to the insurance type. Hua Xiaoheng picked up the mouse and circled the words, Gu Xiangwen's wife. Did you guys find out who Gu Xiangwen's wife is? There's a Ku on the passenger list. Could it be his wife? Zhao Liangzi returned to the passenger list and searched carefully to lock onto the name. It's possible. Women abroad will change their husband's surname after they get married. So it's completely possible that she used the same surname as Gu Xiangwen. But who is this Ku? Is she Nianji and Gu Yanran's mother? Yin Shixiang asked in confusion. He felt that the mystery was getting clearer and clearer, but it was also getting bigger and bigger. He had a burning feeling that it was close yet far away. This is the first watch. Thank you all for your monthly votes yesterday. It's the third watch today. Hurry up and vote for your guaranteed monthly votes. It's still double now. Today is Monday. Recommendation votes are also very important. Thank you all for the 11 pieces of He's Jade that the Guanghan Palace's leader gave yesterday. Thank you all for the He's Jade that my mother gave yesterday. Mwah. Thank you all for the Fish G leader's immortal fate on December 31st, 7 o'clock in the evening. Chapter 472. Hua Xiaoheng was more optimistic. He encouraged Yin Shixiang and Zhao Liangzi. Big Xiong, little Zay, think about it this way. Compared to the time when we had no clues, the situation now is much better. Yin Shixiang and Zhao Liangzi nodded in unison. Yes, Hua Xiao. At least we know Gu Xiangwen's whereabouts and we have another clue. Hua Xiaoheng was indeed their boss. The same thing that made Yin Shixiang and Zhao Liangzi anxious came from his mouth, but it was filled with light and hope. Well said. Gu Xiangwen's wife is also on our radar. We have to investigate her as well. Hua Xiaoheng paused and suddenly remembered that Gu Nianji had never called for her mother even when she was unconscious from a high fever. She had only called him dad and uncle. Gu Xiangwen has always been low-key and mysterious. Now that he has a wife, it'll be even more difficult to investigate. Yin Shixiang raised his thumb and middle finger and asked in a Chinese opera accent, Hua Xiao, do you think it's... Hua Xiaoheng glanced at him and turned back to ask coolly, how is your contact with Barbados? He looked at his watch. 3 p.m. I want to stand on Barbados soil at noon tomorrow to review their honor guards. Yin Shixiang immediately stopped smiling and quickly said, Yes, Chief. I'll contact them right now. Yin Shixiang was very eloquent, so he got the translator from the Wuxia Empire's embassy in Cuba to contact the Barbados side. They only had to say a few words before the Barbados side happily agreed. They had a small population and the government was very idle. It was rare for an important international figure to visit their country, and the Barbados government staff couldn't stop smiling. Finally, I have something serious to do. Barbados was a small country, so there were many things to coordinate. It was actually like a medium-sized city in the Wuxia Empire. With the help of the Wuxia Empire, Barbados quickly arranged Hua Xiaoheng's visit. That night, the Barbados TV station broadcasted breaking news. Gu Yanran was eating dinner in the dining room of her mansion when she saw the news. Her body was a bit weak, so she didn't eat much but ate frequently. Isn't that Major General Hua? He's coming to Barbados for a visit? Gu Yanran's hand that was holding the knife and fork paused. She placed it on the dining table and focused on the news. However, the news didn't go into detail. For example, why he was there and what he was there for were only briefly mentioned in the news. It only talked about how high Hua Xiaoheng's position in the Wuxia Empire was and how important Barbados was to Hua Xiaoheng. Then, it talked about how wise and decisive the current governor of Barbados was. Gu Yanran couldn't help but frown. She knew better than anyone else how powerful Barbados was. Why would they bother Hua Xiaoheng, the most promising military general in the Wuxia Empire, to visit them in person? After the news was over, she unwillingly replayed it. She watched it over and over again, feeling a little strange. Just then her phone rang. She took it to see it was a text from an acquaintance. Hua Xiaoheng is as sly as a fox. He has other motives. I'm afraid I've dragged you into this. Gu Yanran's heart skipped a beat. That indescribable feeling appeared again. It was like a cloud of fog lingering in her heart. She couldn't see the direction of the future clearly, but she couldn't bear to dispel that layer of fog. Gu Yanran played with her phone and walked out of the dining room. She stood on the balcony and looked at the vast coastline in the distance. The air was a little salty from the tide. Pursing her lips, she stood on the balcony and looked at the triangle plums, frangipani, and large daisies planted around the balcony. She sighed softly. It seemed like she had been lonely for too long. Gu Yanran returned to her room and went to her father's room on the second floor. The lights were off in the room. The thick soundproof gold velvet curtains not only blocked the light outside but also the sound of the tide outside. It was as quiet as a mausoleum. Gu Yanran reached out to turn on the wall lamp in the corner and walked in under the orange light. Her father's bed was in the small bedroom in the innermost room. The moment she walked in, it was as if she had walked into a small hospital. There were all kinds of medical equipment, and there were 2 nurses and 2 doctors watching over him 24/7. Miss Gu. Seeing her walk in, the doctors and nurses on duty stood up. Gu Yanran nodded. How is my father today? Same as yesterday. No better, no worse. Lawrence, the Caucasian doctor hired from the United States with a high salary, looked at Gu Yanran with infatuation. This Chinese-American woman was breathtakingly beautiful. He had already put in a lot of effort, but she still refused to accept his pursuit. Gu Yanran walked over slowly and stood in front of her father's bed for a while. Are there any new drugs coming out recently? I hope father will wake up one day earlier. I'll try my best, Miss Gu. Lawrence took a step forward and stood shoulder to shoulder with Gu Yanran. The tall and handsome Lawrence had a pair of blue eyes that were like the sea. When he looked at someone lovingly, almost no one could resist. But Gu Yanran was an exception. She had tactfully said that her family was strict, and her parents would not agree to her marrying a Caucasian. She wanted to marry a Chinese American of the same culture and race. Lawrence thought this was just an excuse because she hadn't fallen in love with him yet. Once she did, those rules would be gone. Gu Yanran knew Lawrence's feelings for her, but she really didn't like him. Also, her parents would definitely not agree to her marrying a Caucasian. Although one of them was gone and the other was bedridden as a vegetable, she still listened to them. Dr. Lawrence, sorry to trouble you. If you think it's boring, I can give you half a year's salary. You can go back to the United States. Gu Yanran turned to smile at Lawrence. This place isn't suitable for you. Lawrence's heart tightened. No one would say no to money. Although he loved Gu Yanran, he loved his job even more. This job was easy and laid back, and the salary was 10 times what he was earning in the United States. He didn't have to say no to money. There were beautiful Chinese American women everywhere. He wouldn't hang on to Gu Yanran. Lawrence immediately put away his affectionate expression and said seriously, Miss Gu, I'm a professional and have my own professional ethics. I can distinguish between work and private. Really? Gu Yanran smiled. Then Lawrence will have to perform well for me to see. She turned to leave. Before she left, she said, add another shift of care. You guys can each work 8 hours. She was going to add more people. The Gu's housekeeper quickly arranged to hire more doctors and nurses. At noon the next day, the Wuxia Empire's private plane landed at the airport in Barbados. Other than Barbados government officials, there were also celebrities and wealthy businessmen who came to greet him. Of course, Gu Yanran was the top non-government official. Major General Hua, welcome to Barbados. She smiled and extended her hand to Hua Xiaoheng. Hua Xiaoheng smiled appropriately and extended his hand to shake hers. So Miss Gu really lives up to her reputation. It was the second watch. Hurry up and vote for your guaranteed monthly votes. It's still double now. And recommendation votes. Oh, it was 7 o'clock in the evening. Whether or not there would be a third watch tomorrow would depend on your monthly votes today. You can also vote for your monthly votes from Baidu and Yunqi. It was calculated together with Qidian. Chapter 473. You flatter me, General Hua. Gu Yanran tilted her head, her almond-shaped eyes twinkling. Her clear eyes were clear and had a hint of sweetness in them. They were clearly similar to Gu Nianji's expression. Hua Xiaoheng was slightly surprised, but he didn't show it. He clearly remembered seeing Gu Yanran a few times in the Wuxia Empire, and her expression and attitude were different from now. Although there wasn't much of a difference, Hua Xiaoheng was too familiar with Gu Nianji, so he could acutely detect even the slightest resemblance to her. Therefore, Hua Xiaoheng noticed the slight difference in Gu Yanran from before. However, he didn't say anything and turned around with a smile to shake hands with the governor of Barbados. They boarded the jeep with him to review the Barbados Honor Guard. Yin Shixiang and Zhao Liangzi wore sunglasses and followed behind Hua Xiaoheng in silence. They couldn't even be bothered to look at the Barbados Honor Guard. It was even worse than Cuba's Honor Guard. However, Hua Xiaoheng watched with great interest. He kept waving to the crowd, causing the crowd to burst into cheers. Gu Yanran wore Chanel's latest Thousand Birds summer suit with a large feather hat tilted on her head. Her face was beautiful and charming. At first glance she didn't look special, but after a second glance you couldn't look away. Standing in the crowd and watching Hua Xiaoheng calmly review the honor guard with the dark-skinned governor of Barbados, Gu Yanran sighed softly. That indescribable feeling came again. Rubbing her chest, she felt the sun was too bright and dizzy. She saw stars, and each star seemed to contain Hua Xiaoheng's smile. Closing her eyes, she held the housekeeper's hand and whispered, "Ellen, take me back." The housekeeper was a middle-aged African-American woman in her 40s. Her body was as fat as a ball, but she walked very nimbly. Standing next to Gu Yanran, she made Gu Yanran look even more delicate and beautiful. "Miss, you're not feeling well again? The sun is too bright. Let's go back." The strong Ellen's arm was almost as thick as Gu Yanran's waist. Half supporting and half carrying Gu Yanran, she walked her into the Gu's black luxury bulletproof extended limousine. Gu Yanran rested in the air-conditioned RV for a while before she could catch her breath. "Miss, shall we go home?" Alan wanted to signal the driver in front to drive. However, Gu Yanran refused. She shook her head and said, "The review over there is not over yet. Major General Hua and I are considered old friends, so how can I leave early? There's a state banquet later. How can I?" Before she could finish her sentence, she heard a bang sound in front of her. It sounded like an aluminum can being suddenly stepped on by someone. What happened? Gu Yanran looked up in the direction of the voice and saw the chauffeur leaning back in the driver's seat. There was a bloody hole on his forehead that was bleeding profusely. "Ah! Murder! Murder!" Seeing this scene, Alan almost hysterically pushed open the door and ran out, shouting towards the viewing platform. The attention of the people on the viewing platform was originally focused on the review, but Alan's voice was so loud that it was even higher than the most powerful soprano. The people who heard it almost jumped out of their throats. Gu Yanran covered her head with her hands and lay on the back seat in agony. At that moment, a few burly men with their faces covered suddenly ran from several directions in the parking lot and rushed straight towards Gu Yanran's extended car. Alan was shot in the head from behind. She didn't even have time to scream. Her eyes were wide open as she fell straight below the viewing platform. Only then did the socialites and government officials on the viewing platform see what had happened. What's going on? How did a gunman get in here? Bodyguards. Bodyguards. Get the police. No. Get the army. Get the army. The viewing platform was a mess. The celebrities and wealthy businessmen all called their bodyguards to escort them away. The government officials called the police and the army everywhere. The police and soldiers present held their guns and stared blankly at the nobles in front of them. They had no idea what to do. No one had taught them how to deal with a situation like this. This had never happened in Barbados in more than 50 years. Their security and defense were outsourced to mercenaries, and the mercenaries took orders from the United States. Therefore, they had always been safe as long as they paid protection fees to the United States regularly. Therefore, a dozen gunmen with no regard for their own lives would be enough to render the Barbados government incapacitated. The governor of Barbados was carried by his bodyguards out of the jeep and ran to the nearest bulletproof vehicle. Xiaoheng, Yin Shixiang, and Zhao Liangzi were left alone in the inspection vehicle. The guards of honor had already scattered when the gunshots rang out and each found a place to hide. Yin Shixiang narrowed his eyes at the motley crowd and said to Xiaoheng, "Mr. Hua, I'll say it again. How dare these ants compare to elephants?" Xiaoheng's eyes searched the crowd and suddenly noticed a bright white light in the direction of the backlight. It was the reflection of the scope. "Get down. Jump out of the jeep." Xiaoheng quickly gave the order and shrank his body to disappear from the roof of the jeep. In less than a second he jumped out of the inspection vehicle. The three of them hid behind the inspection vehicle and used it as cover to confront the gunman. "Did you bring the things?" Xiaoheng waved behind him. Zhao Liangzi handed a pistol to Xiaoheng and said, "The boxes are here. We'll assemble them immediately." They had brought their anti-material rifles with them. Since they were on an official diplomatic visit, no one searched their luggage. Therefore, the three disassembled anti-material rifles were able to enter Barbados successfully. "Hurry and save them. Hurry and save them. Miss Gu has been kidnapped by the gunmen." Amidst the chaos, Gu Yanran's butler realized that his bulletproof car had been driven away, and his young mistress was still in the car. He was so anxious that smoke was coming out of his mouth. Ignoring the gunmen shooting everywhere, he ran to the grandstand and yelled. Bang! Another gunshot rang out and the butler fell from the viewing platform. Xiaoheng heard the butler speak in English and immediately raised his gun to aim. He killed a gunman, then crouched down and ran to the viewing platform. He ran in a zigzag pattern out of habit. Under the sunlight, his body was agile and strong like a leopard. He quickly approached the target. "Who did you say was kidnapped by the gunman?" Xiaoheng patted the butler who had been shot in the back. The butler still had one last breath. He pointed behind him. "MSKU." Then his head tilted to the side and he breathed his last. He looked in the direction the butler pointed and saw the black bulletproof car driving crookedly toward the main road. However, it wasn't driving smoothly. Xiaoheng raised the anti-material rifle and half knelt in front of the viewing platform against the light. He aimed in the direction the bulletproof car was driving. After a while, he decisively pulled the trigger. A special anti-material rifle armor-piercing bullet spun out of the barrel. It whistled through the air and pierced the left rear wheel of the bulletproof car in front. Although the wheel was also made of special rubber, it was still vulnerable to the all-conquering armor-piercing bullet. With a loud bang, the bulletproof car in front was sent crashing to the side of the road. Another khaki-colored Hummer SUV drove in from the side. Gu Yanran was pushed out of the bulletproof car by several masked men and forced into the Hummer SUV that had come to pick her up. "Go after them." Xiaoheng waved his hand to signal the Barbados police and soldiers to chase after them. The men looked at him and then at their governor. "Go. Hurry. That's Miss Gu." The governor of Barbados still valued Gu Yanran very much, so he didn't say anything else and signaled for them to chase after her. However, the police and soldiers were no match for the gunmen. Seeing more and more casualties, Xiaoheng pursed his lips and said to Yin Shixiang and Zhao Liangzi, "Go, let's go after them." They were here for an official visit, and only the three of them were military personnel. The other members of the delegation were all civilians. At a time like this, it was enough to protect themselves. They couldn't let them take the risk. However, Yin Shixiang and Zhao Liangzi refused. Huo will go. You stay. Huo Xiaoheng glanced at them. This is overseas, so we don't have to follow domestic rules. You guys go. Do you know Spanish or Latin? Yin Shixiang and Zhao Liangzi were speechless. By the time they recovered, Huo Xiaoheng had already dashed out like a leopard. He followed the bushes on the side of the road and chased after them. They could only quickly follow and cover Huo Xiaoheng from behind. The governor of Barbados finally regained his senses. He waved his arms and roared loudly, ordering the Barbados police and mercenaries to chase after them. It was the third watch. Everyone hurry up and vote for your guaranteed monthly votes. It's still double now. And recommendation votes. Whether or not there would be a third watch tomorrow would depend on your monthly votes today. You can also vote for your relatives on Yun Qi's side. The votes were calculated together with Qidian. Chapter 474. The khaki-colored Hummer SUV sped through the corridors of the Barbados airport. The pursuers hadn't expected a car to come to the rescue of the intercepted bulletproof car, so they ran and chased, naturally falling further and further behind. Huo Xiaoheng made a prompt decision and immediately raised his sniper rifle. He didn't even have time to aim through the scope as he fired multiple shots at the Hummer SUV that was about to disappear from sight. His marksmanship was terrifyingly accurate, and the Hummer SUV was obviously not bulletproof. The wheels weren't specially treated, so the effects of the shots were even more obvious. There was a loud bang and the wheels of the SUV in front of them exploded. It was like a weapon of mass destruction, blowing up the cement road under the car. For a moment, there were potholes everywhere, mud and stones flew, and smoke and dust filled the air. The Hummer SUV that had been roaring arrogantly made a 180-degree turn on the road before overturning. Although Zhao Liangzi and Yin Shixiang knew Huo Xiaoheng's marksmanship was accurate, it was still shocking to see it this way. They gripped their snipers solemnly and stood behind Huo Xiaoheng to cover him from both sides. A sense of pride welled up in their hearts. This was their boss. They were willing to die for a boss like this. Huo Xiaoheng didn't have the time to think about these things. He was completely focused on the overturned car in front of him. As soon as the car door opened and a masked gunman climbed out, he would immediately shoot. Everywhere the armor-piercing bullet passed, a pink mist of blood rose. The masked gunman seemed to have evaporated. It was already shocking to see from afar, but the gunmen up close were even more terrified. They all hid in the overturned car and didn't dare come out again. It was the first time the power of an armor-piercing bullet had been demonstrated on a Barbados road. The Barbados police and soldiers who had caught up were dumbfounded. They didn't know that an armor-piercing bullet didn't need a spotter and could be fired directly like a pistol. Go get them. Huo Xiaoheng turned around to see the Barbados police and soldiers had caught up. He waved his hand and began to give orders. Those people hadn't dared go before, but when they saw Huo Xiaoheng's marksmanship, they grew bolder. They all put on bulletproof vests and approached the overturned SUV at a snail's pace. However, Huo Xiaoheng knew he was in trouble the moment they surrounded him. Because these people blocked his vision, he couldn't see the masked gunman in the SUV at all. Sure enough, a few gunshots rang out from the encirclement. The police and soldiers surrounding the SUV all dropped to the ground. By the time Huo Xiaoheng rushed over, he realized that there was no one alive in the car. There were only a few bodies that he had shot into pieces earlier. Where is he? Huo Xiaoheng asked the Barbados police officer with a grim expression. He was not afraid of a godlike opponent, but he was afraid of a pig-like teammate. The Barbados policeman raised his head in fear and pointed ahead. He ran away. Where did he go? Zhao Liangzi asked in English, still holding his gun for Huo Xiaoheng. The policeman seemed to be a leader and knew the situation here very well. He hurriedly said, "That's the direction of Miss Gu's house." Are they? Huo Xiaoheng's expression changed completely. Gu Xiangwen must be over there. Could it be that these gunmen were actually targeting Gu Xiangwen? But why did they kidnap Gu Yanran first? Lead the way to Miss Gu's house. Huo Xiaoheng held his gun with one hand and grabbed the policeman's shoulder with the other. Your people follow as well. The policeman nodded quickly. It's over there. Follow me. A group of armed police and soldiers, as well as Huo Xiaoheng, Zhao Liangzi, and Yin Shixiang, chased in the direction of the Gu mansion. The masked gunmen were indeed fleeing in the direction of the Gu mansion. Gu Yanran's hands were tied and her mouth was gagged. They dragged her by her arms and pushed her to the front as cover. When they arrived at the Gu mansion's iron gate, the masked gunman raised his gun and fired. The lock behind the gate opened. What are you doing? The guard at the gate was shocked and angry. He picked up his phone to call the police. A gunshot rang out. The masked gunman who was holding Gu Yanran fired and hit the guard in the forehead. The guard's eyes were wide open as he fell to the ground with a dull thud. Tears streamed down Gu Yanran's face, but she couldn't say a word because her mouth was taped. The Gus were wealthy in Barbados, so they also had armed bodyguards at home. Knowing that something had happened at the gate and that their master was being held hostage, they quickly ran out. As soon as the armed bodyguards showed themselves, they were shot in the head by the masked gunman, just like they had done to the guards earlier. In front of the Gu's bodyguards, the masked gunman's marksmanship was as good as Hua Xiaoheng's. The masked gunmen who had been terrified by Hua Xiaoheng finally regained their confidence in front of the Gu's bodyguards. Let's go in. The masked gunmen could hear the sounds of pursuit and knew they didn't have much time left. They had to quickly finish what their superiors had instructed them to do. When Hua Xiaoheng and the Barbados police and soldiers arrived at the Gu mansion, they saw countless corpses in front of the huge iron gate. They all looked like strong bodyguards or guards. They all had guns in their hands, but they didn't seem to have time to use them before they were shot in the head. There were bloodstains everywhere on the ground. Some had already turned dark brown and were mottled in the shadows of the tropical plants. These gunmen are too arrogant. Are they trying to wipe out the entire family? Yin Shixiang said angrily. Hua Xiaoheng tightened his grip on the MR and said quietly, I hope we can make it in time. He didn't have time to make more arrangements and immediately made a decision. Big Xiong, come in with me. Little Zay, stay outside and make arrangements. Use the highest frequency on your Bluetooth headset to make sure we aren't being monitored. Roger, Chief. At this point, Yin Shixiang and Zhao Liangzi couldn't say anything about not following the rules. They could only listen to Hua Xiaoheng's orders. Hua Xiaoheng went to speak to the Barbados police and soldiers again and ordered them to surround the Gu mansion. They couldn't let the masked gunmen get away. Fortunately, the Barbados police and soldiers were used to listening to other people's orders. It used to be the Americans and now it was Hua Xiaoheng. They accepted his suggestion without any qualms and surrounded the Gu mansion according to his arrangements. Hua Xiaoheng led Yin Shixiang as well as the Barbados police and soldiers who were said to be excellent snipers. Crouching, they followed the tree-lined path in the Gu manor and snuck towards the main building. The main building of the Gu mansion was a 4-story villa in the deep forest. It had an obvious tropical feel, but it also had an obvious Huaxia imperial architectural style. The ground floor was a basement and there were only 3 floors above. They didn't walk for long before they saw the mansion's carved rosewood door. The door was unlatched and dim light shone from the inside. Because the trees were dense, it was completely covered during the day. The light inside the house was definitely even worse, so the lights were turned on during the day. Hua Xiaoheng stopped in the forest 3 meters away from the mansion and listened for a while. The sound of gunshots, shouting, and crying could be heard from the crack in the door. It looked like the masked gunmen were really arrogant. Let's go. Hua Xiaoheng frowned and led the way out. Although he and Yin Shixiang's movements were silent, the Barbados' excellent snipers weren't as professional. The sound of their panting as they ran and the sound of their footsteps shaking the ground quickly traveled into the mansion. Jack, they're here. The masked gunmen inside the mansion were anxious. Hurry and take care of these people. We don't have enough time. When Hua Xiaoheng and Yin Shixiang rushed through the door, they saw 7 or 8 masked gunmen pointing their guns at a group of people kneeling in the living room. From the looks of it, they were probably the Gu family's servants. Gu Yanran's hands were still tied behind her back, and she was facing the door with a gun pointed at her head. Miss Gu, I'll say it again. Where is your father? If you don't speak, you'll end up like them. The masked gunman in the lead raised his semi-automatic rifle and started shooting at the group of servants kneeling in the living room. The gunshots were fierce and bullets flew everywhere. Hua Xiaoheng and Yin Shixiang were both forced to roll out of the living room and hide behind the heavy red sandalwood door. They looked at each other and fired a few shots into the house as well. One on the left and one on the right, they hid behind the door and began to shout to the people inside, "You're surrounded. Throw your guns out and surrender." This was the first night watch. Thank you for your monthly votes yesterday. We'll continue with the 3rd night watch today. Hurry up and vote for your guaranteed monthly votes. It's still double now. And recommendation votes. Oh, and thank you for the Heshibi yesterday. Mwah. Thank you for the Guanghan Palace Leader A for the 11 pieces of Heshibi yesterday and the first night watch. 7 o'clock in the evening. Chapter 475. Hua Xiaoheng and his men were only doing this out of formality, just like how they shouted at suspects in the Wuxia Empire. They didn't expect the masked gunmen to respond. The answer the gunmen gave them was, of course, to raise their guns and shoot at their hiding place. Wu Xiaoheng didn't try to persuade them to surrender anymore. He nodded to Yin Shixiang and the two of them raised their rifles and started shooting. The masked gunmen in the living room suddenly realized their nightmares had come back. They had felt exhilarated when they shot the kneeling servants of the Gu family as targets. Now that they had become targets, the feeling was unbearable. But they had to accept it even if they couldn't. They had to die if they were weaker. Not long after a series of gunshots in the living room, the 7 or 8 masked gunmen were all taken down. Only 2 masked gunmen hid behind Gu Yanran and used her as a shield. They shouted at the door, "If you come any closer, I'll shoot her." Gu Yanran was already on the verge of death. She couldn't even lift her head. She cried at the door, "Let them kill me. As long as I'm dead, my father will be safe." "Shut up." The gunman behind her hit the back of her head with the butt of his rifle. "Take us to your father now. Or else we'll make your life more painful than death." "Jack. We've already searched the entire mansion several times, but we still can't find her father. What do we do? We've already killed everyone in the mansion, but this girl still won't give up." The last 2 masked gunmen hid behind Gu Yanran and conversed in Latin. They thought the people from the Wuxia Empire wouldn't understand, but they underestimated Wu Xiaoheng. He had learned English, French, German, and Latin from his grandmother when he first learned to speak. His talent in languages was no less than his mother's. Wu Xiaoheng understood now. It seemed like the masked gunmen had already searched the entire mansion but couldn't find Gu Yanran's father. That was why they gathered everyone in the living room and executed them one by one for Gu Yanran to see. It was to force her to hand over her father. If Gu Xiangwen wasn't here, then where was he? Wu Xiaoheng thought about it and nodded to Yin Shixiang expressionlessly. He followed the corridor outside the mansion and snuck behind Gu Yanran and the 2 masked gunmen. Wu Xiaoheng's AMR could penetrate walls, just like how he had blown up the kidnappers holding Gu Nianji's classmate at the Wuxia Empire's resort villa. Wu Xiaoheng raised his gun, opened the scope, and aimed at the man's back. He pulled the trigger decisively. Bang! A gunshot rang out in the living room of the Gu family's mansion again. One of the masked gunmen was killed on the spot by Wu Xiaoheng through the wall, but the other masked gunman was quite brave. He was not frightened by the remains of his accomplice. Instead, he grabbed Gu Yanran's back and threw himself at the window. He crashed through the window and rolled down the windowsill. Wu Xiaoheng craned his neck to look at the terrain on the east side of the French window. His heart sank. He had missed the spot after all. The Gu family's mansion was built near the sea, surrounded by small rocky hills, streams, waterfalls, and forests. The Empire's mansion faced a small waterfall. When the weather was good, one could feel the refreshing water vapor coming from the nearby waterfall when they opened the window. It was so cool that it was more comfortable than central air conditioning. There was a pool under the waterfall. The last masked gunman grabbed Gu Yanran and rolled into the pool. He swam to the other side. Wu Xiaoheng had ordered the Barbados police and soldiers to surround the Gu mansion, but they had missed this pool. Of course, it wasn't Wu Xiaoheng's fault. The Gu manor was very secretive and heavily guarded. The members of the Special Operations Forces weren't like these masked gunmen, so the map that Wu Xiaoheng and the others had of the Gu manor was taken from a satellite. They didn't expect the Gu mansion to be built in such a dense forest. Trees were green all year round in tropical areas, so their satellite map was obstructed. They couldn't clearly mark every part of the terrain. The situation was extremely urgent. Gu Nianji's identity depended on this. If the masked gunman was right and only Gu Yanran knew Gu Xiangwen's whereabouts, then if Gu Yanran was killed, the clues they had been searching for 6 to 7 years would be gone. If they made a decision this time, the chances of them finding Gu Xiangwen again would be almost zero. In that instant, many thoughts flashed through Wu Xiaoheng's mind. Gu Nianji's bright, clear eyes flashed through his mind. He couldn't care less. He had no choice but to chase after her. Wu Xiaoheng turned to look at Yin Shixiang and said in a low voice, "Contact little Zay and track my location. I'll make a move first." With that, he rolled to the Empire's window and jumped into the pool in the direction they had fallen. The masked gunman was pulling the dripping Gu Yanran up the stone bank on the other side of the pool. Seeing Wu Xiaoheng chase after them, the man raised his gun and fired several shots in Wu Xiaoheng's direction. The sound of water splashing mixed with the sound of the waterfall above them. Sunlight seeped through the gaps between the trees, and the splashing water reflected rainbow light. A rainbow rose from the small pool. Although Gu Yanran knew it was a purely optical phenomenon, when she saw it with her own eyes, A man as handsome as a god jumped into the pool to save her life. It felt like her heart was hit by a sledgehammer. Her chest tightened and all the blood in her body was sucked into her heart. Even her heart stopped beating. What are you looking at? He's already dead. The masked gunman cursed and slapped Gu Yanran. Come with me. Grabbing Gu Yanran's hair, he almost dragged her to the ground and hurriedly left on a small path. Gu Yanran looked in the direction of the pool and the rising rainbow. She couldn't help feeling a lump in her throat, and the corners of her eyes gradually reddened. However, she forced herself not to cry, but the expression in her eyes seemed to become more and more distressed. Just when she thought Hua Xiaoheng had died, another splash appeared not far away. The godlike man stood up from the shore of the pool and held a black gun. He aimed at them. Gu Yanran let out a short cry from her throat, but she quickly swallowed it down. However, the masked gunman also noticed it. He looked back and quickly fired in Hua Xiaoheng's direction. Then he dragged Gu Yanran to a rowboat by the sea that was powered by a diesel engine. Go up. Be quiet. If you want to cause trouble again, I'll shoot you. The masked gunman pressed the gun against Gu Yanran's forehead and tied her up. By the time Hua Xiaoheng arrived, he saw a rowboat that looked like an assault boat about to start up. He didn't know if there was a problem with the engine or if the masked gunman didn't know how to operate the boat, but it took him 5 precious minutes to ignite the engine. The diesel engine roared loudly. Gu Yanran's mouth was gagged, and she was thrown to one end of the rowboat with her hands and feet tied. Then a thick rope was used to tie her to the boat. Hua Xiaoheng chased them to the beach. The rowboat had just left the shore not long ago, and because the waves were too strong, the rowboat didn't move very fast, so it was swept to the shore from time to time. The masked gunman held the gun in his right hand and raised it in the air. He smiled arrogantly at Hua Xiaoheng and slowly lowered his arm. The black muzzle was aimed in Hua Xiaoheng's direction. Hua Xiaoheng hurriedly jumped into the sea and dove down. The jade-green waves rolled up snow-white spray, which looked like transparent crystals under the sunlight, sparkling and translucent. Gu Yanran poked her head out of the rowboat and looked in the direction Hua Xiaoheng had come from. Tears streamed down her face. The masked gunman glared at her, and she quickly turned her head away to block her view with her messy long hair. The rowboat moved forward in the water, and Hua Xiaoheng chased closely behind. The masked gunman at the helm was flustered, but he couldn't smoothly steer the rowboat in the direction he wanted. He cursed angrily and raised his leg to kick Gu Yanran a few times. The 10 of them originally had their own tasks, but they were almost wiped out by the guy from the Huaxia Empire. Now he was still chasing after him. Was he trying to kill him? The masked gunman stared in the direction Hua Xiaoheng was diving. He gritted his teeth and suddenly tightened the rudder. The rowboat paused in the waves and almost flipped over. In the blink of an eye, Hua Xiaoheng had already caught up. The masked gunman didn't care about the rowboat anymore. He opened the bolt of his gun, loaded it, and picked it up to lie on the edge of the boat. He adjusted the direction through the scope. It was the second update, and it was the first update for the 11 pieces of Heshibi that the leader of the Guanghan Palace A had rewarded yesterday. There was still one more update that I owed. Today's monthly votes weren't as many as yesterday's. Sob. Did my friend's monthly votes already run out? What about the recommendation votes? 7 o'clock in the evening of the third update. I'll try my best to hold on for another day. I'll see how it goes tomorrow. Chapter 476. Hua Xiaoheng's dark head was faintly discernible in the turquoise waves as he swam towards the rowboat. Bullets whizzed towards him from the rowboat and splashed around him. The seawater was salty, just like a lover's tears. Because they were coming to an island country, Hua Xiaoheng and the others had made ample preparations, including all kinds of convenient diving equipment, such as the most basic things like scuba goggles. Hua Xiaoheng was wearing a pair of high-quality diving goggles, which made it much easier for him to dive under the sea. However, he didn't have a diving throat, so he always needed to surface to breathe. The masked gunman on the rowboat nearby took advantage of the time he needed to breathe to shoot him from time to time. Unfortunately, he couldn't hit accurately. The bullets whizzing around him still affected his judgment of direction. Hua Xiaoheng carried the sniper rifle on his back and tried his best to maintain a paddling posture. It was indeed very difficult. The masked gunman on the rowboat saw that he couldn't hit him no matter how hard he tried, so he stood up angrily and waved his arm at Hua Xiaoheng. Hua Xiaoheng pursed his lips and tried his best to keep his body hidden underwater. The waves crashed and crashed towards the shore. It took a lot of effort for both the man and the rowboat to gradually move away from the shore. However, the sky gradually darkened and it seemed like it was going to rain. Storms on the sea came and went as they pleased, and it was completely unpredictable. The masked gunman saw that even the weather was going against him and howled in anger. Finally, he couldn't take it anymore and squatted down with his gun to press against Gu Yanran's chin. He removed the gag from her mouth and said fiercely, "I'm asking you for the last time. Where is your father? If you don't tell me now, I'll go see your mother and sister early." "Do it." "I won't tell you." Out of the corner of her eye, Gu Yanran saw a silhouette floating not far from the surface of the sea. Her heart began to pound. Trembling, she shrank back and shouted, "I've wanted to see my mother and sister for a long time. Shoot me." She closed her eyes and pretended to face death calmly. The masked gunman looked at Gu Yanran fiercely and said fiercely, "You think I don't dare to kill you? Let me tell you, when I'm ruthless, I can even kill my own parents, wife and children. But it won't be that easy for you to die. If I fail my mission, I won't have a good ending when I go back. Before I die, I have to find some fun." The gunman threw away the gun in his hand and began to tear Gu Yanran's clothes. At the same time, he took out a needle from his pocket and was about to stab it into Gu Yanran's neck. At that moment, Hua Xiaoheng had already climbed into the rowboat from the water. Although he tried to lighten his movements, how much weight could a small boat carry? The boat was about to capsize due to the crazy masked gunman, so the moment Hua Xiaoheng boarded the boat, the masked gunman, who was taking off his pants, noticed him. He turned around abruptly to see Hua Xiaoheng climbing onto the rowboat. Shocked, he was about to grab his gun when Gu Yanran wailed and picked up the man's gun from the bottom of the boat. She fired multiple shots at his chest. "Go to hell. Go to hell. Bastard. Bastard. Go to hell." The masked gunman didn't seem to expect Gu Yanran, who was already a lamb waiting to be slaughtered, to have the ability to resist. But he didn't have the strength to turn around. Gu Yanran, whose clothes were torn, sat up abruptly and pushed the masked gunman's body into the sea. Hua Xiaoheng looked at Gu Yanran, who was on the verge of going crazy. He reached out a hand and pressed it down. "Miss Gu, it's me. Don't panic. He's already dead." Gu Yanran glared at Hua Xiaoheng and seemed to recognize him after a while. She screamed and threw herself into Hua Xiaoheng's arms. The Chanel dress that had been torn apart by the masked gunman was already in tatters. Gu Yanran didn't wear a bra and only a bra. Although she looked thin, her breasts were ample. Hua Xiaoheng instinctively raised his hands to avoid touching Gu Yanran's bare shoulders. But he couldn't move away at this time. In the narrow rowboat, if he moved slightly too much, he would either fall into the sea or push Gu Yanran into the sea, just like how Gu Yanran had pushed the masked gunman's body into the sea. As he hesitated, a flash of lightning suddenly flashed in the sky above the sea, followed by a clap of thunder. Heavy rain poured down from the sky, and the sea became even more turbulent. The small rowboat couldn't handle the heavy rain and was in danger of capsizing at any time. Hua Xiaoheng quickly took off his jacket and covered Gu Yanran with it. He quietly held her arm and helped her sit down at the bottom of the boat. "Miss Gu, I have to go steer the boat. You sit first." Gu Yanran's entire body was trembling. Her lips were pale, and they were like epiphyllum in a summer night, delicate and moving. She nodded and sat down at the bottom of the boat. She looked up at Hua Xiaoheng as he began to operate the rowboat. The rain was heavy, and the sound of the wind and rain drowned out all other sounds. Gu Yanran didn't say anything and just watched Hua Xiaoheng work on the rowboat's rudder. They braved the wind and rain to move forward on the vast sea. However, the wind and rain were too strong and they couldn't reach the shore. In the end, they could only find a small island nearby. After abandoning the boat and getting ashore, Hua Xiaoheng held his AMR with one hand and Gu Yanran's arm with the other. They walked to the beach of the island. Gu Yanran snapped back to reality and wasn't as anxious anymore. She tightened Hua Xiaoheng's jacket and looked around. "This is Mara Island. I used to come here with my parents and sister for holidays. Come with me." Hua Xiaoheng looked at her in surprise. "You have a house here? This island belongs to the Gu family." Gu Yanran turned around and smiled at him. "Luckily you have a strong sense of direction. Otherwise, who knows where we would have drifted to." That was true. If they got lost on the vast sea, they would be no different from dead people. If they didn't starve to death, they would die of thirst or exhaustion. Hua Xiaoheng was silent for a moment and looked up. "Where is your house?" The heavy rain was still falling, and the rain was so dense that it looked like a fine piece of rain-colored silk. At first glance, it looked like it was covered in mist. Although Gu Yanran was familiar with the area, it still took a lot of effort to find her family's holiday house in the rain. In order to preserve the island's original style, the house was made of logs and only had a layer of varnish on the outside. However, it was a completely different world inside. It had all the modern facilities including power generation equipment. The only pity was that there was no internet. Hua Xiaoheng walked into a guest room and took a shower to wash away the salty and fishy smell of the sea water. He turned on his Bluetooth headset while he was showering. Although he had been soaking in the sea for so long, it didn't affect the quality of the call at all. Hua Xiaoheng contacted Zhao Liangzi. Little Zay, locate me now. Zhao Liangzi and Yin Shixiang watched Hua Xiaoheng chase the masked gunman and Gu Yanran into the sea. They almost regretted not holding him back. They were in a terrible mood and even prepared to die in the line of duty as long as they could find Hua Xiaoheng's body. They didn't expect Hua Xiaoheng to come out of the sea alive. Zhao Liangzi felt like he was on a roller coaster. One moment he was at the bottom, the next he was at the peak. Right now he was in an extremely good mood. He hurriedly said, "No problem. Hua Xiao, don't hang up. I'll locate you right away." It only took 5 seconds for Zhao Liangzi to determine Hua Xiaoheng's latitude and longitude based on the satellite tracking system in his Bluetooth headset. "Hua Xiao, why did you go there?" Zhao Liangzi was speechless. "It's too far. There's a storm on the sea now, so helicopters can't go out. We can only wait for the rain to stop tomorrow to pick you up." He then asked, "Are you alone there?" Hua Xiaoheng paused and said casually, "I'm on an island with the Gu family. Gu Yanran is also here." It was the third watch. "Hurry up and vote for your guaranteed monthly votes, dear friends. It's still double now. And recommendation votes. Tomorrow's first update wouldn't be so early, because Mao Han would be working tomorrow. Try to update the first watch before 9 a.m. tomorrow." Chapter 477. Understood. Zhao Liangzi didn't ask any more questions. It was obvious that Hua Xiao had rescued Gu Yanran and floated to the Gu's island near Barbados. As for the masked gunman who had kidnapped Gu Yanran, needless to say, he had either been killed or captured by Hua Xiao. There was no third option. Zhao Liangzi and Yin Shixiang almost blindly worshipped Hua Xiaoheng's abilities, and he had never disappointed them. After explaining everything to Zhao Liangzi, Hua Xiaoheng took off his Bluetooth headset and placed it on the sink. He quickly showered and planned to put on his clothes. Although they were drenched, they weren't very dirty and could still be worn. Coming out of the shower with a towel, Hua Xiaoheng heard someone knock on the bathroom door. Gu Yanran's voice said, "Mr. Hua, I have a few sets of my father's clothes here. He's about the same height as you and they're all brand new. The tags are still on them. I left them at the door. You can come out and change into them after you're done." She left. Hua Xiaoheng didn't say anything but waited for a while before opening the door to see that Gu Yanran had really left. On the bed in the bedroom were 3 neatly folded sets of clothes. One was seawater blue, one was light gray, and one was dark olive green. Hua Xiaoheng thought they were all colors that looked good. Slightly taken aback, he walked over and opened the 3 sets of clothes to examine them carefully. The 3 sets of clothes were made of linen and cotton. The weave was very dense and suitable for tropical areas. The style was low-key and simple, but the workmanship was extremely meticulous. It was obvious that they were expensive. He looked at the sets of clothes again. They were all brand new and even the tags were still there. Of course the price tags were gone. He was silent for a while before taking off his soaked clothes and changing into the dark olive green set of casual clothes. From the clothes, Gu Yanran's father was indeed about the same height as Hua Xiaoheng, but he wasn't as muscular. His shoulders were a bit narrow, but thankfully, lycra had been added to the fabric to make it stretch. It didn't have the elegance that a thin person would have. Instead, it made him look more muscular. After changing, Hua Xiaoheng opened the bedroom door and actually smelled food. He did not follow the scent. Instead, he took out a small device that he removed from the button of his shirt and walked around the room. It looked like he was looking at the furnishings of the room, but in fact he was checking if there were any hidden infrared cameras. Because the people of the Special Operations Forces were used to doing this, it had already become a professional habit. Every time he arrived at a new place he would check it out of habit. When Yin Shixiang and Zhao Liangzi had accompanied Gu Nianji to the United States for a short stay, they had also used this device to detect hidden pinhole infrared cameras. Before he showered, he had checked the bathroom to make sure that there were no hidden cameras. Only then did he feel at ease. It was not that he suspected anything, but it was his professional habit. Hua Xiaoheng walked around the living room of the wooden hut, but the device in his hand didn't show any abnormalities. It looked like a normal vacation home without any hidden devices. Hua Xiaoheng turned around and walked back to the bedroom. He put the small device back into the button of his shirt and took his soaked clothes to the kitchen. He asked Gu Yanran, who was busy there, "Miss Gu, do you have a washer and dryer here?" Gu Yanran was wearing a light yellow apron with frilly edges. She was opening a stew pot and scooping a spoonful to taste. Hearing Hua Xiaoheng's voice from behind, she turned around in surprise to see a tall and handsome man strolling into the kitchen. His facial features were more defined, like an ancient Greek marble sculpture, but much more exquisite and handsome than those sculptures. His face was expressionless, but it was definitely not cold and indifferent. Just like that, he walked over calmly. His deep ink-black eyes were like the starry sky in the dark night, capable of drowning anyone who looked into them. Gu Yanran felt nervous. She knew she must be blushing. Very blushing. She could feel the unusual temperature on her cheeks. She remembered when she had a high fever when she was young. Her mother was very worried and stayed up all night to stay by her bedside. She pressed her cheek against hers from time to time to feel the change in her temperature. Now she was almost the same as that time. She had a high fever. "Yes, it's in the small room over there. Mr. Hua, you can put it in the small bamboo basket in the room. I'll wash it." Gu Yanran looked away and pointed to the laundry room. Hua Xiaoheng walked over and noticed Gu Yanran's unusually flushed face. He asked, "You have a fever?" Gu Yanran nodded instinctively, then quickly shook her head. She tried to be calm and said, "No, it's too hot. I'm making soup." As she spoke, she tilted her body so Hua Xiaoheng could see the two stew pots on the electric stove. Hua Xiaoheng smiled. "Thank you, Miss Gu, but I don't want soup. You can drink it yourself. You had a shock today, so you need to nourish yourself." As he spoke, he looked around the kitchen again before turning to leave. He never ate food made by others outside, let alone here. The nature of Hua Xiaoheng's job meant that he had to be cautious. Taking risks was part of his job, but he never took unnecessary risks. Gu Yanran didn't expect Hua Xiaoheng to not eat the soup she made. Her eyes dimmed. She called out to him, "Mr. Hua, are you worried that the soup isn't clean? I can drink it for you to see." She scooped a small bowl of milky white soup for herself. Looking down, she stuck out her pink tongue to test the temperature. Then she quickly licked the milky white soup with the tip of her tongue. Finally, she raised her head and wrapped her little tongue around her lips, sucking in the soup at the edge of her mouth. "See, there's no problem," Gu Yanran said carefully. She looked at the sky outside the kitchen. "It's raining heavily outside and the temperature is dropping fast. You should drink some hot soup to warm your body. I put ginger sugar in the soup to warm your stomach." She turned around and stirred the soup in the stew pot with a spoon. She rambled on. "My sister has had a bad stomach since she was young. She's very picky about what she eats. Mom and Dad spoil her and I spoil her even more. In order to nurture her appetite, I learned a lot of medicinal diet recipes from the most famous Wuxia doctor, just for her picky appetite." Hua Xiaoheng paused in his steps and said, "Really?" But he still left the kitchen without looking back. Gu Yanran waited for a while. Seeing that there was no sound behind her, she turned around quietly. She saw that the kitchen door was wide open, and Hua Xiaoheng was nowhere to be seen. "It's raining heavily. Where did he go? Don't go out." Gu Yanran was anxious. This island belonged to the Gu family. She knew better than anyone else. In order to preserve the island's original appearance, her parents insisted on not doing too much human intervention on the island. They only built a small wooden hut on the leeward side of the island and didn't touch anything else. So there were wild animals, poisonous snakes, crocodiles and large lizards on the island. Gu Yanran's face paled at the thought. She quickly took off her apron and went to her room to get a flashlight for the outdoors. She put on her raincoat and went out into the rain. "Mr. Hua? Mr. Hua? Mr. Hua?" Gu Yanran's sobbing voice echoed in the night sky of the island, but it was drowned out by the sound of the rain. At that moment, Hua Xiaoheng was walking through the coconut grove on the island. He was also wearing a poncho that he had taken from the Gu family's wooden cabin and a pair of knee-high rubber shoes. He looked up at the coconuts hanging from the tall coconut trees. He gulped. He was a little thirsty. He wouldn't touch the things in the Gu's wooden hut, but the coconuts in the wild were a natural source of water. There were also all kinds of tropical fruits that could be used as food: bananas, mangosteens, pineapples, wax apples and durians. The ecological environment on this island was exactly the same as Southeast Asia. Hua Xiaoheng picked up a few stones from the ground and threw them at the coconut trees like darts. He shot down several giant golden coconuts. He held the golden coconuts and clapped his hands together to crack open the hard shell. He found the hole where the water came out and held it up to drink in big mouthfuls. He drank 3 basketball-sized golden coconuts in a row before his thirst was slightly quenched. Gu Yanran held a flashlight in one hand and a raincoat in the other as she trudged through the mud. Her voice was hoarse from all the shouting before she finally saw a tall figure walking out of the bushes nearby. It was Hua Xiaoheng in his raincoat. He held a large string of fruit strung with tree bark in one hand and a long snake as thick as a teacup in the other. Gu Yanran was shocked. Mr. Hua, you have to be careful. That snake is poisonous. It's fine. I've already knocked out its poisonous fangs and dug out its gallbladder to eat. I'll make snake stew later. Hua Xiaoheng said calmly and threw the snake in front of Gu Yanran. Miss Gu, do you know how to make snake stew? Gu Yanran only saw a poisonous snake as thick as a teacup, with a dark green and gold garland on its body, thrown at her feet. She screamed again and quickly took 2 steps back. Mr. Hua, I don't know how to make snake stew. Hua Xiaoheng shook his head speechlessly. Then I'll make it. I'll borrow Miss Gu's kitchen. No problem. Gu Yanran followed Hua Xiaoheng back to the wooden hut's kitchen with trepidation. Hua Xiaoheng used a sharp Swiss Army knife to skillfully skin the snake, clean it and cut it into 1-inch cubes. He threw it into the boiling water and added coconut water, a little salt, and a few unknown herbs to act as spices. Gu Yanran saw that the snake had been cut into pieces and put into the pot. She was finally less afraid. She walked over boldly and looked at the milky white snake stew in the pot. She took a deep breath and couldn't help but say, "It smells so good. I didn't expect Mr. Hua to be so good at cooking." This is the first 3,000-word update. Today is the first day of work after the holiday, so I'm a bit busy. I won't be able to make it to the second update at noon. Come to read the big chapter at 7 p.m. I'll update the 2 updates together. Remember to vote for the monthly and recommendation votes. It's still double the monthly vote. Oh, and Chapter 478. I wouldn't call it craftsmanship. It's just cooked. Hua Xiaoheng picked up the spoon and scooped up a bowl of milky white snake soup. He placed it in front of Gu Yanran. Try it. Gu Yanran's face lit up with joy. She quickly tasted the soup and chewed on it. It tastes even better than it smells. Mr. Hua, you're amazing. Not only are you a major general of the empire at such a young age, but you're also a great cook. She then clicked her tongue. I wonder which girl is so lucky to be able to marry Mr. Hua. Hua Xiaoheng picked up the spoon and scooped himself a bowl of snake soup. He didn't continue Gu Yanran's words and naturally changed the topic. Miss Gu, do you know who the gunmen are? Gu Yanran froze and frowned in thought. My family is actually very low-key in Barbados. I don't know why they have to find my father. She looked at Hua Xiaoheng honestly. Actually, although my father didn't die in the plane crash 7 years ago, he became a vegetable after he was rescued. To be honest, he's no different from a dead person. These gunmen are trying so hard to find him. I don't know why either. Hua Xiaoheng pretended to be deep in thought. Miss Gu, what's your father's name? Did he survive the plane crash? That's a blessing in disguise. The ancients say that those who survive a great disaster are destined for good fortune. Your father will definitely wake up. Gu Yanran and Hua Xiaoheng sat at the dining table together with a bowl of milky white snake soup in front of them. Gu Yanran stirred the soup with a spoon and tasted it. She sighed. Mr. Hua, you saved my life. I won't hide anything from you. My father's name is Gu Xiangguan. Have you heard of the MH210 accident 7 years ago? Hua Xiaoheng nodded. Of course. How many people in this world don't know about it? However, we do know that there were no survivors from the plane crash. May I ask if your father? At that time, the plane crash attracted the attention of the media all over the world. For 2 whole months, almost everyone was guessing where the plane had gone and why the United States, which was said to have a 24-hour global satellite monitoring system, could not find any trace of it. All kinds of hypotheses were rampant and had almost developed into an academic school. It was not until 2 years after the accident, which was 5 years ago, that the wreckage of the flight was found on a small island in the Indian Ocean that the whole thing came to an end. Gu Yanran ate a few mouthfuls of the snake soup and finished the soup in the small bowl before lowering the soup. She wiped her mouth with a napkin and said quietly, "Since you asked, I won't hide it from you. Although my father keeps a low profile, he's not an unknown person. On the contrary, he's a very famous scholar in an international academic institution. It's just that he's very protective of our family and has never appeared in public." Hua Xiaoheng stirred the snake soup slowly with his spoon and listened to Gu Yanran speak without saying a word. When she paused, Hua Xiaoheng would look at her attentively. His encouraging gaze would make anyone open their heart and say what was on their mind. Gu Yanran was no exception. She became excited. Before the plane crash, my parents were on a flight from Southeast Asia to the United States to attend an academic conference before returning to Barbados from the United States. However, there was a problem with the flight midway. The entire plane suddenly deviated from its flight path and disappeared from radar before finally crashing on a small island in the Indian Ocean. My father's phone was modified by him. Even under such extreme circumstances, it could still locate our family. I used the modified mobile phone at home to confirm my father's location and rushed over in advance. Hua Xiaoheng was a little surprised. Your father is that amazing? What kind of phone is it? Can I see it? Gu Yanran nodded and took out her phone to put on the dining table. Please take a look, Mr. Hua. Hua Xiaoheng picked up Gu Yanran's phone and looked at it carefully. On the surface, Gu Yanran's phone was just the most popular iPhone. Gu Yanran pried open the socket on the side of the phone and showed it to Hua Xiaoheng. Here, my father developed a small positioning system himself. It can use any monitoring satellite in space to locate him. It said that it's a very simple physics principle, but unfortunately, I don't understand it. Hua Xiaoheng looked at it for a long time before picking up the small tweezers in his Swiss Army knife and carefully picking out a chip from the socket. The chip was unbelievably small. To clearly see the circuit system on it, he would need a magnifying glass that was magnified 100 times. He really didn't know how Gu Xiangwen came up with such an advanced thing. When it came to chips, Hua Xiaoheng was half an expert. He asked Gu Yanran, "Do you have a magnifying glass?" Gu Yanran nodded quickly. "I have one in my father's study. Mr. Hua, do you want to come to the study to talk?" Hua Xiaoheng looked down at the almost invisible chip in his hand. His gaze swept over the snake soup that Gu Yanran had just finished drinking. He nodded. "Okay, thank you, Miss Gu." Gu Yanran brought Hua Xiaoheng to her father's study. As soon as they entered, Hua Xiaoheng became completely vigilant. The more he learned about Gu Xiangwen, the more he admired him. And in this world, there were only a handful of people who could earn his sincere admiration. Gu Yanran found Gu Xiangwen's magnifying glass and passed it to Hua Xiaoheng. Hua Xiaoheng took the magnifying glass and carefully looked at the small chip on his finger. He was amazed by the craftsmanship. Did your father really make this himself? Or did he draw the blueprints and someone else made it? The most sophisticated machine tools were not made by machines but by hand. My father made it himself. Gu Yanran's tone was filled with natural pride. My father is very amazing. Hua Xiaoheng looked at it again and again before putting the chip back into Gu Yanran's phone. He continued to ask, "So you're saying that not long after the accident happened, you used the chip in this phone to determine your father's location?" "Yes, Mr. Hua knows the situation better than I do. The whole world's attention was on the South China Sea, but the direction I determined was the Indian Ocean. Therefore, I didn't want to make it public. The ship and plane I found were all our own. I didn't use a single cent from anyone else." Gu Yanran recalled the situation at the time, and her eyes couldn't help turning red again. She choked and said, "But what's the use of this GPS? When I found him, he was already unconscious, but he was still hugging his mother's body tightly." Gu Yanran couldn't continue. She quickly covered her mouth with a tissue and sobbed. Hua Xiaoheng didn't say anything. He quietly leaned against the edge of the desk with both hands in his trouser pockets. He waited for Gu Yanran to finish crying before handing her a tissue. "Miss Gu, my condolences. It's already been 7 years. Every day I think about how good it would be if my parents and sister were still alive." Gu Yanran's tears fell like a broken necklace, and the tip of her nose was red. Hua Xiaoheng smiled noncommittally. He looked down and thought to himself that when he saw Gu Yanran last year, he didn't see how much she missed her family. At that time, the high-spirited Gu Yanran was like the representative of the world's most outstanding women. Her gestures were full of poise, and she was very good at seeking benefits for herself based on the actual situation. The timid and helpless look she had now was actually very unsuitable for her. It was more suitable for Gu Nianji. Hua Xiaoheng's thoughts involuntarily drifted back to Gu Nianji. His heart felt like it was being gripped by a pair of small hands and twisted violently. He felt a bit of heartache and pressed his hand against his chest. "Mr. Hua, what's wrong? Are you not feeling well?" Gu Yanran noticed Hua Xiaoheng's subtle movements and quickly asked, "Are you hurt? Let me take a look." She hurriedly rushed to Hua Xiaoheng's side. Just as she was about to approach him, she stopped and said, I'll go get the medical kit. She then ran to the door, but just as she reached the door, she suddenly fell to the ground without warning. She seemed to have fainted, but also seemed to have fallen asleep. Her breathing was even, and her chest rose and fell slightly. Her face was much more rosy than before. Hua Xiaoheng put both hands in his trouser pockets and walked over slowly. He smiled and said, "Silver ring snake soup and sleeping grass. That's enough to let you sleep peacefully for the night." With that, he walked away from Gu Yanran. Before he left, he even carefully closed the door to the study for her. As soon as he walked out of the study, Hua Xiaoheng's entire aura changed. He completely removed his disguise in front of Gu Yanran, and now he had returned to his usual shrewd and capable self. He took out the transparent membrane gloves that he carried with him and put them on. He then cut off the electricity in the entire house, and the small wooden house immediately fell into complete darkness. After the power was cut off, all the surveillance systems couldn't operate anymore. This way there really was a surveillance system that they couldn't find, and they couldn't see Hua Xiaoheng's movements. He put on his night vision goggles and began to search the entire wooden house for traces of Gu Xiangwen. Hua Xiaoheng didn't expect to find Gu Xiangwen's whereabouts here, but this was the first place he could get close to where Gu Xiangwen had lived. Perhaps it was also where Gu Nianji had lived. As he walked down the dark wooden corridor, his eyes scanned the wooden walls one by one. He couldn't help but imagine the little Gu Nianji from back then. Had she also walked down this corridor wearing little leather shoes and a fluffy little skirt as she ran forward? There were 5 rooms on the second floor. 4 of them were bedrooms and the last one was a chess room that doubled as a gym. He could tell that Gu Xiangwen was someone who loved sports. There was all kinds of fitness equipment, but it had been covered in dust for a long time. It was probably because no one had used it since his accident. Gu Yanran obviously wasn't someone who loved sports, and Gu Nianji, Hua Xiaoheng thought of Gu Nianji, and he couldn't help smiling. No one knew better than him how much Gu Nianji didn't like sports. Because the room had a wooden floor and was covered in dust, he didn't walk into the room to avoid leaving any traces. He only looked at the door. The curtains were half open and moonlight shone in through the gaps between the trees. He could see the dust dancing in the moonlight. Hua Xiaoheng closed the door gently and walked to the largest bedroom on the second floor. That should be Gu Xiangwen and his wife's room. He pushed the door only to find that it was locked. Hua Xiaoheng didn't need to go back to Gu Yanran to find the key. Instead he took out his small tools and fiddled with the keyhole. The lock clicked open. The room was covered in thick carpet, so he didn't have to worry about leaving footprints. Hua Xiaoheng walked in. The entire bedroom was about 50 square meters and was very spacious. There were large wooden windows, and the glass was made of single-sided crystal. It could be seen from inside the room, but it couldn't be seen from outside the room. It was a great protection for privacy. There was a fireplace on the east wall of the bedroom, and there were some framed pictures on it. There should be pictures inside. Hua Xiaoheng walked over and adjusted his night vision goggles to the brightness to take pictures. He looked at the picture frames. Even with his years of cultivation and composure, he couldn't help but pause for a few beats. The picture frame in the middle was obviously a picture of a family of 4. A gentle and elegant man and a quiet and gentle woman sat in the middle. There were 2 girls standing next to them. The older girl was about 16 or 17 years old, and the younger girl was about 11 years old. The older girl was definitely Gu Yanran because she didn't look much different from when she was 16 or 17 years old. However, the younger girl was definitely Gu Nianji from 7 years ago. But just looking at the picture, no one would be able to guess that the little girl in the picture was the adult Gu Nianji. This is the 3,500 words of the second chapter. Remember to vote for monthly and recommendation votes. It's still double the monthly vote now. Oh, and good night everyone. You must vote for monthly votes. Nagging. Chapter 479. Hua Xiaoheng quickly aimed his night vision goggles in the direction of the photo frame and snapped a few high-definition photos. He had only heard of the person's name in the past, but now he had a corresponding appearance. Hua Xiaoheng looked at the photo for a long time, as if he wanted to find a similarity between Gu Nianji and her parents from the photo. Unfortunately, they really didn't look much alike. Gu Nianji looked a bit like her mother when she was young. They both had round faces, slender eyes and curved eyebrows. However, after Gu Nianji grew up, her slender eyes actually grew longer. Her eyes became big, round and sparkling just like a manga girl. Her face shape also became a classic oval face. The eyes were the windows to the soul. When the eyes changed, the entire person's aura changed. Gu Nianji's father was very elegant. If one looked closely, they would notice that the expression of father and daughter were quite similar. They seemed to be smiling when they weren't talking, giving people the feeling of a spring breeze. Xiaoheng reached out and took the photo frame down to take a closer look. He then opened the back of the photo frame and took out the photo, turning it around to look at it. This photo was indeed a bit old and it didn't look fake. The point was, even if it was fake, how could the person who made it know what Gu Nianji looked like when she was only 12 years old 7 years ago? He couldn't tell from her current appearance at all. Xiaoheng verified the authenticity of the photo and carefully put the photo frame back in its original position. He turned around and searched the large bedroom, but he couldn't find any other special traces. Xiaoheng used the camera that came with the night vision goggles to take many more photos before leaving the large bedroom and going to the other rooms. The room directly facing Gu Xiangwen and Gu Nianji's bedroom was obviously Gu Yanran's bedroom. The furnishings inside were high-end and luxurious, but it didn't seem tacky. It was obviously the taste of a girl who grew up in a rich family. Xiaoheng only glanced at the door before closing it and going to the smaller bedroom next to hers. Chapter 480. Xiaoheng gestured with his hand but didn't place it on Gu Yanran's neck. He only smiled and said, "I don't know how to set bones. I only know how to break people's necks. Miss Gu, are you sure you want me to help you?" Gu Yanran shrank back slightly and looked shocked. "No way. Mr. Hua, you don't look like that kind of person. I'm a soldier, so I don't know how to control my strength. Once I relax on the battlefield, it's a matter of life and death. That's it." Xiaoheng turned around. "Let's go. We only have 3 minutes. There's only 1 minute left." They had to run to the nearby tarmac to get there in 1 minute and they had to run very fast. Gu Yanran didn't expect Xiaoheng to run so quickly and disappear in the blink of an eye. She couldn't help but smile knowingly. This Major General Hua wasn't young anymore, but he was still shy. Gu Yanran also blushed and held her neck as she chased after him. Thankfully, she changed into comfortable shoes last night. Otherwise, she really wouldn't be able to run fast in her 10-centimeter high heels. If there was anything Gu Yanran regretted in her life, it was that she wasn't very tall. If her face wasn't pretty, she could get plastic surgery. If her breasts were too small, she could get breast implants. However, she was short. Other than wearing 10-centimeter high heels every day, there was no other way. She couldn't cut off her legs and then cut them off, right? Gu Yanran stumbled as she followed Xiaoheng to the nearby tarmac on the beach. She saw a very large helicopter parked there. The propellers were already turning and the loud roar was deafening. The propellers created a huge air vortex. Gu Yanran's hair was disheveled by the airflow, and she couldn't even open her eyes. However, she still twisted her neck and managed to keep up with Xiaoheng's pace. Xiaoheng had already boarded the helicopter. He peeked his head out from the rope and smiled at her. The handsome young man with 8 snow-white teeth was Zhao Liangzi, whom she had met in the Wuxia Empire. He was also his personal secretary. Gu Yanran quickly pulled the rope and climbed up. When she reached the cabin door, Zhao Liangzi reached out to her. "Miss Gu, hold my hand." Gu Yanran grabbed his hand and used his strength to get on the helicopter. As soon as she got on, the helicopter shook violently, and then, under the huge airflow caused by the propellers, it slowly took off. After taking off, it circled a few times on the surface of the sea before flying back in the direction it came from. Gu Yanran fell from the jolt, and it took her a lot of effort to slowly get up. Zhao Liangzi noticed her strange posture and asked, "Miss Gu, what's wrong with your neck?" Gu Yanran smiled wryly. "I spent the night on the floor in my father's study and sprained my neck. It's probably a stiff neck." As she spoke, she looked around the cabin. "Where's Mr. Hua? I saw him coming up first, didn't I?" A young man with thick eyebrows and big eyes turned around from the driver's seat and smiled. "Mr. Hua is piloting the plane. Miss Gu can talk to little Zay if you have something to say." Gu Yanran froze. She recognized the person as Xiaoheng's other personal secretary, Yin Shixiang. Holding her neck, she stood up and exclaimed, "Mr. Hua knows how to fly a helicopter? That's amazing." "That's right. Our Mr. Hua knows a lot of things." Yin Shixiang nodded at her with a smile. "Please sit. Little Zay, move a seat for Miss Gu." Zhao Liangzi asked her to sit on the seat next to him and fastened her seat belt. Gu Yanran quickly said, "I sprained my neck and need to set my bones. Don't fasten my seat belt yet." Before Zhao Liangzi could speak, Xiaoheng's voice sounded from the front. "Big Xiong, isn't your family an ancestral healer? Go set Miss Gu's bones." Yin Shixiang looked at Xiaoheng in shock and mouthed silently, "When did my family become an ancestral healer?" Hua Xiaoheng didn't need to look to know what expression Yin Shixiang had on his face. With a smile on his lips, he looked straight ahead and focused on piloting the helicopter. He said calmly, "Go quickly. This is an order." Military orders were hard to disobey. "You win." Yin Shixiang looked at Hua Xiaoheng as if he couldn't take it anymore. However, when Hua Xiaoheng glanced at him from the corner of his eyes, he immediately smiled. Okay. My family is an ancestral healer. I'm the best at setting bones." Yin Shixiang unbuckled his seat belt and squeezed out from the front seat to stand in front of Gu Yanran. He tilted his head to look at her neck and extended his thick arm to gesture at her slender neck. "Miss Gu, which side do you need to set?" The corners of Gu Yanran's mouth twitched. She asked suspiciously, "You really know how to set bones?" "Of course I do. You came to me just in time." Yin Shixiang boasted as he rubbed his hands together. Gu Yanran was even more afraid now. Shrinking back, she twisted her neck and said, No need. I'll go back and see my family doctor." "You really don't need to?" Yin Shixiang pretended to step forward. "But Mr. Hua gave the order. Military orders are absolute. You can't just say no. Come on, stretch out your neck." Yin Shixiang rolled up his sleeves heroically. Gu Yanran looked at his thick arm and wide palm reaching for her neck. She had no choice but to close her eyes and scream, "No need. Mr. Hua, I don't need you to set my bones." Yin Shixiang only listened to Hua Xiaoheng's orders, so he pretended not to hear Gu Yanran no matter how loud she screamed. His large hand wrapped around her neck and squeezed. He suddenly pointed in the opposite direction. "Why is there someone over there?" Gu Yanran looked over instinctively. Yin Shixiang took the opportunity to turn her neck half a circle. There was a cracking sound, and a sharp pain spread from the top of Gu Yanran's spine to her entire body like an electric current. The pain made her see white light. She screamed and fainted from the pain. Zhao Liangzi crossed his arms and watched Yin Shixiang's tricks. He snickered. "Look at what you're capable of. You made someone faint. Isn't it just a stiff neck? You don't even need to twist your neck. You just need to distract yourself. If you can do it, then you can do it. Don't talk nonsense if you can't do it." Yin Shixiang waved his fist at Zhao Liangzi. "You didn't say anything earlier, but now you're being sarcastic. It's fine as long as my technique works. Although it's a little painful, it's better than being a beauty with a crooked neck. Don't you think so, Hua Xiao?" Hua Xiaoheng was in the front seat, concentrating on operating the helicopter and paying attention to the various data on the dashboard. He didn't pay attention to Yin Shixiang's nonsense at all. Zhao Liangzi leaned over to look at Gu Yanran and nodded. "This girl really can't take fright. How did she faint?" Yin Shixiang shook his hand with a smile and said proudly, "My technique of separating tendons and dislocating bones is pretty good, right? The pain can kill a person. In fact, this was a secret torture method developed from the bone-setting technique." Zhao Liangzi gasped and quickly moved to the side. He said in surprise, "How did Miss Gu offend you? You want to use this technique on her?" "I don't know any other bone-setting techniques. Hua Xiao also knows that I only know this one." Yin Shixiang felt wronged. He walked to the front seat and sat down. He looked at Hua Xiaoheng and asked, "Hua Xiao, I accidentally made Miss Gu faint. You won't blame me, right?" Hua Xiaoheng didn't turn around. "What was my order? To set Miss Gu's bones? Then did you do it?" "Yes. Her neck is fine now, but—" Yin Shixiang scratched his head. He still felt like something was wrong. Hua Xiaoheng looked at him slowly. "How did you become a soldier? As long as you completed your mission and didn't break any laws or regulations, who cares how you completed it?" Yin Shixiang understood instantly. "Hua Xiao, following you is my blessing. I want to follow you in my next life and the life after that. My heart will never change in 3 lifetimes." Yin Shixiang held his heart and exaggeratedly showed off to Hua Xiaoheng. Hua Xiaoheng pulled the lever, and the helicopter immediately spiraled down rapidly. The entire helicopter spun in the air like a top. Yin Shixiang and Zhao Liangzi were dizzy from the spinning. They didn't feel well. Their faces paled as they pulled on the rope and yelled, "Hua Xiao! What's wrong? Did we run into turbulence?" Hua Xiaoheng didn't speak. He focused on the front and finally pulled the lever back after a while. The helicopter returned to normal and stopped spinning. The shore in the distance was faintly discernible. They were about to reach Barbados. Yin Shixiang hugged the trash can and vomited. Hua Xiaoheng turned to look at him. "Uncomfortable? Disgusting. Why don't you just give me a quick stab?" Yin Shixiang said weakly. The weather at sea is really unpredictable. Yes, I felt the same way when I heard you talking. It has nothing to do with the weather at sea, Hua Xiaoheng said calmly. He even had the time to look back at him. Yin Shixiang completely understood. Hua Xiao was deliberately messing with him. Okay, Hua Xiao, I was just joking. How am I qualified to be with you for 3 lifetimes? Yin Shixiang forced a fawning smile and bowed to Hua Xiaoheng. I said the wrong thing. I said the wrong thing. Zhao Liangzi also understood and snickered from the side. He shook his head and shifted his gaze to Gu Yanran. Luckily Miss Gu fainted. Otherwise Miss Gu would have thrown up her intestines after that tumble. Hua Xiaoheng still didn't care about Gu Yanran's condition. He said to Zhao Liangzi, contact Barbados and tell them we're about to arrive. Have their military and police be on standby. Those shooters still don't have a clue. We can't relax. Yes, Chief. Zhao Liangzi answered loudly and immediately contacted the Barbados military. Gu Yanran slowly woke up. The pain in her spine was still lingering. She felt like she was paralyzed, but her neck was fine. It wasn't twisted anymore. Mr. Hua, are we arriving? Gu Yanran asked weakly. I'm very worried about my father's safety. Mr. Hua, can I ask you and your colleagues to help me with something? That depends on what it is and whether I can help, Hua Xiaoheng said calmly. He had actually already guessed what Gu Yanran was going to ask for. It was exactly what he wanted. As expected, Gu Yanran said, it's my father. I want to ask Mr. Hua and your colleagues to help me protect my father and transfer him safely to the United States. Barbados is no longer safe for him. This was the 3,200 words of the second chapter. Remember to vote monthly and recommendation. It's still double the monthly vote now. Oh, and vote if you have the monthly vote. Don't keep it until the end of the month. This month's double is on the 7th day of the month. It's almost over. Chapter 481. Yin Shixiang and Zhao Liangzi didn't say anything. They looked at each other and then at Hua Xiaoheng in unison. Hua Xiaoheng was still focused on controlling the helicopter and preparing to land. Although what Gu Yanran said was exactly what Hua Xiaoheng wanted, he didn't agree immediately. His many years of professional training and work experience had allowed him to grasp the human heart to the acme of perfection. Hua Xiaoheng began to move the landing gear as he said, sit tight, we're about to land. The 3 people in the helicopter hurriedly fastened their seat belts. Not long after, the roar of the helicopter stopped. Hua Xiaoheng unbuckled his seatbelt and walked out of the pilot's seat. He said to the confused passengers on the plane, we're here. Let's go. Zhao Liangzi had a dreamy expression on his face as he muttered to Yin Shixiang, holy shit. Big Xiong, stop praising yourself as an ace pilot. Compared to Hua Xiao, you're just a bastard. You're the bastard. Yin Shixiang retorted angrily, but when he turned to look at Hua Xiaoheng, his face was full of admiration. But Hua Xiao, you're too amazing. The angle and strength of the descent were truly amazing. I can't feel anything at all. Both pilots and passengers knew that the hardest part was taking off and landing. The middle part was actually very smooth. Moreover, landing smoothly was more difficult than taking off. Yin Shixiang had always felt that his flying skills were very good, second only to Hua Xiaoheng, the true ace pilot of the Wuxia Empire. However, in reality the distance between him and Hua Xiaoheng was as deep as the Mariana Trench. He walked up to Gu Yanran and shook his head seriously. Miss Gu, I'm here in Barbados for a visit. I have official business. I'm a soldier of the Wuxia Empire, not a mercenary. I don't accept temporary employment. I sympathize with what happened to your father, but I'm sorry I can't help you. After saying that, he turned around, opened the door of the helicopter, and jumped down. Gu Yanran was truly stunned this time. She didn't expect Hua Xiaoheng to reject her without hesitation. She had originally thought that Hua Xiaoheng would never reject her proposal, whether it was for business or personal reasons. Could it be that they were all wrong? Gu Yanran frowned. Her eyes followed Hua Xiaoheng's figure as he jumped down. Yin Shixiang and Zhao Liangzi were also surprised. They knew why Hua Xiaoheng had come to Barbados, but years of training had taught them to hide their true emotions. 4 people in their line of work, they could only let others see what they wanted them to see. If they didn't want others to see it, they couldn't reveal it at all. Otherwise, only death awaited them. Yin Shixiang and Zhao Liangzi laughed and said to Gu Yanran, Miss Gu, your suggestion is too much. What do you take us for? We are not bodyguards, nor are we mercenaries. With Hua Xiao's status, how could he be someone's personal bodyguard? Who could afford it? Don't you agree? Gu Yanran was taken aback and quickly smiled apologetically. That's not what I meant. I saw that Mr. Hua is kind-hearted and capable. He was even willing to help me, a person he doesn't know very well, so I was wondering if I could ask him to help my father. Tears streamed down her face as she spoke. She choked out, I haven't found my sister yet. My father and I depend on each other. I'd rather die than let anything happen to my father. Zhao Yangzi couldn't bear it. He hadn't interacted much with Gu Yanran, so he didn't hate her. Of course he didn't like her either. He only treated her normally. But this time he saw a woman who would rather sacrifice her own life than reveal her father's location. He couldn't help but feel some respect for her. He also knew that Gu Nianji might really be Gu Yanran's sister, even though their DNA was different. Zhao Yangzi knew he was soft-hearted, so he didn't say anything more. He turned and jumped off the plane. Yin Shixiang, however, was different. He took out a tissue and passed it to Gu Yanran with a smile. Miss Gu, don't cry. Wuxiao has state affairs to attend to, so he really can't help you. Gu Yanran accepted the tissue to wipe her tears. Yin Shixiang took the opportunity to brush her back and take away a few strands of her fallen hair. Actually, Gu Yanran's hair was disheveled this time. Her long hair draped messily behind her, and there were plenty of strands that fell. Just to be safe, Yin Shixiang secretly kicked a small metal plate used to hold the plane near the cabin door. The absent-minded Gu Yanran had just walked to the cabin door when she tripped on the metal plate. Gu Yanran hit her nose on the metal frame of the cabin door with a loud bang. Her nose started to bleed. Yin Shixiang yelled and chased after her. This time he took out a handkerchief to wipe the blood from Gu Yanran's nose and stuffed it with a tissue. Gu Yanran was very embarrassed. After getting off the helicopter, she refused to see Hua Xiaoheng again and asked Yin Shixiang to take her home. Yin Shixiang quickly said, I have to ask for instructions. He quickly ran to where Hua Xiaoheng was and whispered, Hua Xiao, we got Miss Gu's hair and blood samples. However, she wants me to take her home. Hua Xiaoheng glanced at him and said calmly, give it to me. She took the sample from Yin Shixiang's hands and said slowly, Little Zay and I aren't mercenaries. Are you? Or are you starting a second career as a part-time driver and bodyguard? Yin Shixiang's face turned pale from Hua Xiaoheng's mockery. He hung his head and said, I'm doing this for Nianji? If Gu Nianji was really Gu Yanran's sister, then Gu Nianji would be stuck in the middle if things went sour with Gu Yanran now. Hua Xiaoheng also thought of this, but he didn't care. Gu Nianji was his woman, so he wouldn't make things difficult for her. However, there were priorities. The most important thing now was to find her father, Gu Xiangwen. Although Gu Yanran's suggestion just now was very much in line with Hua Xiaoheng's intentions, he didn't want to agree immediately. That would be too obvious. Also, Hua Xiaoheng didn't know Gu Yanran's way of doing things, so it was better to be cautious. There were also the shooters who hadn't been caught yet. If those people still had backup plans and were still watching them from somewhere, then wouldn't it be perfect for the people secretly hunting Gu Xiangwen to find clues if they followed Gu Yanran to Gu Xiangwen and sent them to the United States? Hua Xiaoheng had planned countless secret operations, and many of them were still unsolved mysteries in the intelligence agencies of various countries. Trying to play tricks in front of him would be overestimating themselves. Therefore, no matter what, Hua Xiaoheng couldn't agree to it right away no matter what. Find someone to tell Gu Yanran that you still have work to do and can't send her. Ask the governor of Barbados to find someone to send her back. Hua Xiaoheng turned to get into his private car. You and little Zay can find someone to follow her secretly. Don't let them find out. Yes, Chief. Yin Shixiang obeyed Hua Xiaoheng's order and went to speak to the governor of Barbados. When they found out that the wealthiest person in their country, Miss Gu Yanran, needed someone to escort her home, many people immediately volunteered to send her home. In the end, the governor sent a company of armed soldiers to escort Gu Yanran back to the Gu's mansion. Yin Shixiang and Zhao Yangzi were amused by the sight of Gu Yanran being escorted into the military vehicle with a stunned expression. Gu Yanran didn't dare to enter her mansion when she returned. This place was almost exactly the same as when she was kidnapped yesterday. However, there were several long yellow strips of cloth at the entrance and a police notice board indicating that it was a crime scene. Walking into the living room, she discovered that the bodies of the servants were no longer there. However, there were large and small drawings of people drawn with chalk on the ground to show where the bodies had been. The spacious living room was filled with these drawings that looked like graffiti. Gu Yanran was sad and disgusted. She turned around and ran away. Returning to the main door, she held onto the metal pillar and vomited until her face was pale. The people from the Barbados governor's office who had followed her here were very sympathetic and quickly came up to her. Miss Gu, you can't stay here anymore. Why don't you stay at the governor's office for a few days? Our governor will be very happy to give you protection. Gu Yanran held onto the pillar and vomited for a long time before feeling better. She shook her head. No, I'll stay at a hotel. There were only a few five-star hotels in Barbados, and they were all assets of the Gu's. The people from the governor's office knew about this and stopped trying to persuade her. They immediately sent her away. Coincidentally, as soon as she walked into the hotel lobby, she saw Hua Xiaoheng, Yin Shixiang, and Zhao Liangzi coming down from the hotel in their regular clothes. This is the first update. Just like yesterday, come to see the big chapter at 7 o'clock p.m. I'll update the two updates together. Remember to vote for the monthly and recommendation votes. It's still double the monthly vote now. Oh, fine, the monthly vote ranking dropped by one more place. There's only one more day before the double vote ends. Everyone hurry up and vote. Chapter 482. Oh, Miss Gu, why are you here again? Yin Shixiang greeted her curiously. Are you here to see a friend? Gu Yanran shook her head with a wry smile. I can't live in my house anymore. She started crying again. Zhao Liangzi quickly pulled Yin Shixiang away and whispered in his ear, You're having a good time being a third wheel. Miss Gu isn't talking to you, okay? Why isn't she talking to me? I was the one who asked her first. Yin Shixiang was very unhappy. Why can't she greet me? How lowly do you think I am? It's not that I think you're lowly, but you're AF * king lad. You have a glib tongue, but I think you have 8 out of 9 opened orifices and still have one left. Zhao Liangzi glared at Yin Shixiang in exasperation. Go to the side and don't interrupt. Yin Shixiang snorted and also glared at Zhao Liangzi. I wonder who has 8 out of 9 opened orifices and still has one left. Little Zay, I'm much better at reading Mr. Hua's mood than you are. But forget it, it's not good for us to interfere. Let's just watch for now. With that, the two of them crossed their arms and stood behind Hua Xiaoheng on guard, looking like standard bodyguards. Hua Xiaoheng put his hands in his trouser pockets and stood leisurely in front of the crying Gu Yanran. His expression was calm as he quietly watched her cry like a pear blossom in the rain. When the guests in the hotel lobby saw this, they almost imagined a melodramatic drama of A Man's Heart of Steel. Hua Xiaoheng looked around and reached out to help Gu Yanran. Miss Gu, let's talk over there. Gu Yanran nodded and used a handkerchief to wipe her nose before following Hua Xiaoheng to the cafe next to the hotel lobby. It was a cafe that only VIP guests could enter. It was set up in a relatively independent area to pay attention to the privacy of the guests. The two of them sat down behind an exquisite rockery. There was an exquisitely arranged and hidden booth there. The waitress in the cafe respectfully served Gu Yanran the best coffee in the hotel. She spoke to Gu Yanran carefully, almost as if she was kneeling in worship. Miss Gu, my condolences. Gu Yanran's tears started flowing again. She took the waitress's hand and placed a large US dollar bill in her hand as a tip. The chambermaid was both moved and grieved, and left with a complicated expression. Hua Xiaoheng fiddled with the coffee cup in front of him but had no intention of drinking. He asked calmly, Miss Gu, what happened to your family? Weren't those gunmen all killed? Everyone in my family died. It was like a nightmare. Gu Yanran's eyes were red from crying. You don't know how cruel that scene was. The people who had been with you for more than 10 years were suddenly gone. All that was left in the living room were the portraits of them lying in the last position. I couldn't stand it. I couldn't stand it when I saw that scene. I can't live in that house anymore. I want to sell it. Hua Xiaoheng was expressionless. He silently passed a tissue to Gu Yanran. Miss Gu, since there were such murders there, would it be possible to sell it if you wanted to sell it? Hua Xiaoheng was actually just saying it casually, but it seemed to remind Gu Yanran. She nodded immediately. Mr. Hua is right. It's not fair to sell this house to others. Forget it, I won't sell it. I plan to tear it down and build a theme park here. I'll open it to all Barbados citizens for free. Hua Xiaoheng looked at Gu Yanran in surprise. He leaned back in the booth and tapped his fingers on the dark green marble countertop. You don't have to do that, right? It's a house that your family lived in for so many years. Hua Xiaoheng paused before asking, How long has your family lived there? Gu Yanran looked down and wiped her tears with a tissue. She sobbed a few times to slowly calm herself down. She reached for the coffee cup and took a sip. The warm, silky coffee slid down her throat and soothed Gu Yanran's panic from the past day and night. She looked up and bit her lip to quickly glance at Hua Xiaoheng. She saw that he was looking at her intently. His inky black eyes shone with a deep, warm light. Gu Yanran suddenly felt very safe. It was the first time she felt completely relaxed by Hua Xiaoheng's side. This man, who was as quiet as a mountain, had this kind of soothing charisma. But it was a pity. Gu Yanran sighed deeply in her heart. She didn't want to beat around the bush with Hua Xiaoheng anymore. Mr. Hua, I'll be honest with you. Gu Yanran twirled the white porcelain coffee cup in her hand and looked at Hua Xiaoheng frankly. She recovered her previous imposing manner. You came to Barbados for my father, Gu Xiangwen, didn't you? I don't understand. My father is in danger now. Why aren't you willing to help? Hua Xiaoheng didn't expect Gu Yanran to have the guts to tell him his motive. He wouldn't admit it. Miss Gu, where did that come from? Hua Xiaoheng objected calmly. I came to Barbados for a military visit. It has nothing to do with your father. Oh? Is that so? Gu Yanran smiled, her eyes as clear as water. Aren't you suspecting that Gu Nianji is my biological sister and my father's biological daughter? Hua Xiaoheng's heart skipped a beat, but he quickly calmed down. He couldn't be led around by her. How can you say that? Although you both share the same surname, how can I determine that she's your biological sister just based on that? Your father's biological daughter? Isn't that too much of a joke? Hua Xiaoheng crossed his legs calmly and clasped his hands together on his knees. He smiled at Gu Yanran with an ambiguous smile. Gu Yanran looked at Hua Xiaoheng's calm and masculine posture and handsome face. She sighed inwardly. It wasn't easy to meet a man who was so compatible with her. Unfortunately, she was one step too late. Of course it's not that simple. Gu Yanran raised a brow and put down the coffee cup in her hand. Actually, it's not just you. Lawyer, he is also looking for evidence. Hua Xiaoheng was speechless. There was a trace of impatience in his heart, but he didn't show it on his face. He continued to look at Gu Yanran quietly and allowed her to continue. Mr. Hua, to be honest, when I first saw Gu Nianji, I fell in love with her immediately. It was from the bottom of my heart, but looking at her, I really didn't think she was my sister. It was only because she had the same name as my sister that I had a good impression of her. Gu Yanran was even more honest as she revealed the secrets that He Zhichu and Hua Xiaoheng were both pursuing. Hua Xiaoheng nodded. Is that so? We didn't see that. Forgive me for being blunt, but Miss Gu, you don't seem to have met Nianji that many times, right? Gu Yanran was choked by Hua Xiaoheng's words. She looked at Hua Xiaoheng with pity and said quietly, Mr. Hua, have you never experienced the feeling of meeting someone by chance but feeling like old friends at first sight? Hua Xiaoheng said calmly, never. I believe time reveals a person's heart. Yes, it seems like you're a very cautious person. Gu Yanran nodded and understood Hua Xiaoheng a little better. But I believe in the feeling of turning white as new, the feeling of turning white as new. Turning white as new, the feeling of turning white as new meant that some people would be like strangers even after spending a lifetime together, while some people would feel like old friends at first sight when they just met. Turning white as new, the feeling of turning white as new? Hua Xiaoheng smiled. I didn't expect Miss Gu to grow up overseas. Your Chinese is so good. Mr. Hua, you flatter me. Gu Yanran smiled, then suddenly became sad. My parents paid a lot of attention to my Chinese education. When my sister was young, she was naughty and didn't like to speak Chinese. My parents spoiled her and said she didn't need to learn. Unfortunately, I couldn't do it. Even if I didn't like it, I had to be forced to learn. Sigh, but now they can't force me to learn even if I wanted to. This heartfelt feeling of lost parental love was very sincere and touching. If the person Gu Yanran was facing wasn't Hua Xiaoheng. Unfortunately, the person she was facing was Hua Xiaoheng. Hua Xiaoheng was indeed a very cautious person. His personality had always been like that, and after enlisting in the military, his secret work had magnified his cautiousness 100 times over. Therefore, it was harder than reaching the heavens to walk into someone like him's heart. Hua Xiaoheng looked at Gu Yanran non-committally and wasn't moved by her feelings. He only continued to ask, did Professor He also look for Miss Gu? Yes, of course. I'm much closer to him than I am to you. Gu Yanran was very honest. She had already realized that honesty was probably the only way to get Hua Xiaoheng's sincere help. She had no way out now. If Hua Xiaoheng didn't help her and her father, she felt that she might be buried in Barbados for the rest of her life. I heard Professor He mention that Miss Gu is a big client of his law firm. Hua Xiaoheng nodded. But why did he ask you about Nianji? I don't know why, but he asked me for the contact information of my sister's family doctor and dentist since she was young. I think they've been contacted by now. Gu Yanran glanced at Hua Xiaoheng with a smile and looked away to the floor-to-ceiling window beside the booth. Opposite the floor-to-ceiling window was a man-made tropical rainforest lake. The view was wide and beautiful, and she could even see colorful tropical birds flying in the forest. Her mood soared like that of a gorgeous tropical bird. Hua Xiaoheng looked down at the untouched coffee in front of him and pondered the matter. Hijichu must have asked for the contact information of Gu Yanran's sister's family doctor and dentist when she was young to verify Gu Nianji's identity. But wasn't he very clear about Gu Nianji's background? Why did he want to verify it? Hua Xiaoheng keenly sensed that there must be something he didn't know, but he didn't want to speculate. He planned to call Gu Nianji and ask when he had time. Gu Yanran saw that Hua Xiaoheng had obviously fallen silent. She bowed and called him tentatively, "Mr. Hua? I still have this request. Can you help me? Help my father? Maybe Gu Nianji really is my sister. Then if you help my father, you'll be helping her father, right?" This was the second installment of 3,000 words. Remember to cast your monthly votes and recommendation votes. It's still double the monthly votes now. There's only one more day before the double pay ends. My dear friends, hurry up and cast your monthly votes. Don't force me to make a big move and ask for votes alone. Chapter 483. Hearing Gu Yanran's words, Hua Xiaoheng's heart sank. Even Gu Yanran knew to use Gu Nianji to convince him. Did everyone know how important Gu Nianji was to him? She couldn't be his weakness and he didn't need one. Hua Xiaoheng shook his head and rejected Gu Yanran's suggestion again. Even if Gu Nianji is your sister, and even if your father is her father, do I have a reason to save your father? Gu Yanran couldn't help frowning. Why was Hua Xiaoheng so stubborn? He refused to help no matter what. Did she really overestimate Gu Nianji's importance to Hua Xiaoheng? Thinking of this, her gloomy mood suddenly lightened a little. Although she was still frowning, her tone was a little cheerful. She blinked and pursed her lips. 2 deep dimples appeared on her cheeks. "Mr. Hua, just treat it as helping a friend. Are you not even willing to help? This is a matter of life and death. You're a soldier. Shouldn't soldiers save lives?" Hua Xiaoheng smiled. "Saving lives is a doctor's duty, not a soldier's. I take back what I said earlier. Miss Gu's Mandarin still needs to be practiced. Don't fail to convey your meaning." Hua Xiaoheng stood up. "If Miss Gu doesn't have anything else, I'll be leaving now." With that, Hua Xiaoheng turned around and left without any hesitation. Gu Yanran sat in the booth and stared at Hua Xiaoheng's back for a long time before looking away. Hua Xiaoheng walked out of the booth calmly and met up with Zhao Liangzi and Yin Shixiang in the hotel lobby. "Let's go. We'll act according to plan." They left the hotel lobby and hailed a taxi at the entrance. They told the driver that they wanted to do some sightseeing in Barbados and to let him drive wherever he wanted. It would be best if he drove to places with more people and better scenery. They would give him a big tip. When the taxi driver heard that he could also work as a tour guide and earn 2 salaries, he was so happy that he grinned, revealing his white teeth. "What are the 3 of you interested in? Is it the sea, food, or women or medicine?" The driver turned around, his eyes flashing with surprise. He looked at the 3 people sitting in the car as if he was looking at 3 walking banknotes. Hua Xiaoheng wore sunglasses and sat in the back row by the window on the right. He did not speak. Yin Shixiang sat in the passenger seat. He chuckled and said in English with a thick black accent, "We want to see a mansion. Can you take us there?" "Mansion?" The taxi driver scratched his head. "There are many mansions in Barbados. What kind do you want to see?" He thought for a moment and said, "The mansions here are guarded by many bodyguards. Ordinary people can't get in. If you want to see it, you can only watch from afar." Zhao Liangzi followed Hua Xiaoheng to the back seat near the left window. "Oh?" he asked. "Really? Why did he need a bodyguard? Barbados looks very safe." "It's very safe." The driver shrugged his shoulders and said disapprovingly, "But you know, the richer they are, the more afraid they are of death, so they have to put themselves in a cage." This sentence made everyone laugh and the atmosphere in the car became lively. Hua Xiaoheng also said slowly, "Actually, Barbados isn't really safe, right? There was a gunfight at the airport where your governor was welcoming VIPs yesterday." "That's the governor's business," the driver said nonchalantly. "How can normal people like us encounter something so exciting? I heard it's like filming a movie." The driver became even more animated as he spoke. As he drove, he turned around and said, "It's not just the airport. There's also the Gu family. Do you know the Gu family?" Hua Xiaoheng tightened his grip. What Gu family? I don't know. We just came to Barbados for business. Well, that's fine. Let me tell you, the Gu family is the richest family in Barbados. Not only are they rich, but they are also very charitable. Barbados' largest hospital, orphanage, and the largest charity organization, food bank, were all set up by the Gu family. The driver became excited as he spoke and even honked a few times. Zhao Liangzi was shocked and quickly said, "Big brother, drive carefully. Drive carefully. Don't turn around, we can hear you." "Don't be afraid, I'm a good driver." As soon as the driver turned around, he saw that he had almost driven into the opposite lane. He immediately turned the steering wheel back and broke out in a cold sweat. After this close shave, the driver didn't turn around anymore. However, he continued to tell Hua Xiaoheng and the others about the good deeds the Gu family had done in Barbados. In addition to opening hospitals, orphanages, and food bank, they provided free meals to the poor. They also donated to schools and invited famous doctors and professors from other countries to teach in Barbados. It could be said that the development of this country was inextricably linked to the Gu family. But good people don't live long. The driver sighed after he finished telling them about the good deeds the Gu family had done. Mr. Gu of the Gu family did so many good things, but he still couldn't escape the plane crash. He was already in a vegetative state when he was rescued. Now that 6 or 7 years have passed, he still hasn't woken up. I think he'll never wake up. Really? That pitiful? Yin Shixiang followed up on the driver's words. Their family is so rich. If they hire the best doctors, he'll definitely wake up, right? That's what everyone says, but it's been 6 or 7 years and he still hasn't woken up. I don't think there's much hope. The driver shrugged again and turned the car into a quiet tree-lined road. Hua Xiaoheng immediately recognized that this was the road to the Gu residence. However, they were stopped by a group of police officers on the way. That's the crime scene up ahead. You can't go in, a police officer said to the driver as he knocked on the window. The driver was a bit excited. Sir, can we go in and take a look? Just one look. These 3 esteemed guests came to our country for business and were interested in luxurious mansions. Of course, I brought them to see the most luxurious mansion in our country. Unfortunately, they came a day too late. Otherwise, they would have been able to take a good look around. Hua Xiaoheng and the others found out from the driver that before Gu Xiangwen's accident, they had opened their special garden-style mansion to the public for free every week. Of course, only a portion of the mansion was open to the public. The Gu family's own residence was not open to the public, but the attractions and buildings that were open to the public were enough for a normal person to see for an entire day. After Gu Xiangwen's accident, Gu Yanran took over the Gu residence. She said that it was for Gu Xiangwen's recovery, so she only opened it to the public for 1 day a month. Yesterday was the day they opened their mansion to the public for free. I didn't expect something like this to happen. Those rich people won't do something like this again in the future. The driver was very emotional. Originally, the Gu family was the most generous in our country. They didn't lock themselves up in a cage and instead opened it to the public. In the end, something like this happened to a family like that. How tragic. Those rich people will definitely hire more bodyguards in the future. It's no wonder. Hua Xiaoheng glanced at Yin Shixiang. Yin Shixiang understood and took out a roll of US dollars from his pocket. He secretly stuffed it into the driver's hand. Brother, help us. Think of a way. You made it sound so interesting. You've already piqued our interest, but you won't let us in. That's not nice. The driver grasped the roll of US dollars and realized that it was really a thick wad. He immediately opened the car door and walked out. He shook the police officer's hand and stuffed $3 into the officer's hand. Sir, do me a favor. We're only going in to take a look. We won't drive in. Can we walk there? Look, we're tourists. This is also to increase the country's income. If Mr. Gu knew, he wouldn't refuse. The police officer quickly glanced at the US dollars in his hand and realized that it was as much as half a month's salary. He immediately stuffed it into his trouser pocket and turned to look. Then you guys go and come back quickly. I'll stay here. What's your number? I'll call you when it's time to let you guys out. No problem. No problem. The driver nodded and agreed. He went back to open the car door and said to the 3 people inside, "Come out quickly. That gentleman was kind enough to let us in for a look. We have to go and come back quickly." Hua Xiaoheng nodded and got out of the car with Yin Shixiang and Zhao Liangzi. They pretended not to see the police officer. The police officer also looked up at the sky and pretended not to see the 3 of them. They allowed the taxi driver to lead them to the Gu residence. Hua Xiaoheng had chased after the masked gunman yesterday. He had been very nervous along the way and didn't take a good look at the scenery along the way. This time he was here specifically for sightseeing, so he looked around carefully. Huashao, I finally understand why the Goose Island isn't shown on the map. Zhao Liangzi lowered his head to show Huashaoheng his equipment. Gu Xiangwen must have installed anti-satellite detection interference equipment on his island. There's one here too, but it's not very dense. It can only interfere with short-range radio calls. It can't interfere with satellites. Huashaoheng had long suspected this was the reason. He understood the principle of anti-interference, but he was afraid that even his mother, Song Jining, wouldn't be able to make such equipment. In addition to having a profound knowledge of physics, it also required superb hands-on skills. If Gu Xiangwen had really made these equipment himself, then he had already surpassed the most famous craftsmen in the world. It was said that machines were better than humans, but in fact the most sophisticated machine tools, chips, and intelligent driving instruments were all made by humans. Machines couldn't achieve the required precision. The three of them followed the driver to the large iron gates of the Gu's mansion. There was still a yellow police line in front of the iron gates, but it wasn't high. The driver stepped over it easily. There were no police officers in front of the gates. It was probably the only one on duty here. After all, there was no one living here anymore, so there was no need to send extra people to guard it. The police force in Barbados was very scarce. Huashaoheng looked at the yellow police line and was speechless. It was useless at all. He lifted his head and stepped over it. The three of them followed the driver into the living room of the Gu's mansion. They saw all kinds of human bodies drawn with chalk in the living room, and a solemn atmosphere washed over them. They suddenly had the urge to take off their caps and mourn. They touched their heads and realized they weren't wearing their military caps. Yin Shixiang coughed and asked, "Where are the people here? I heard they're all dead. Only Mr. Gu and his eldest daughter are still alive," the driver said softly as he looked around in fear. This was the first watch. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.